Hello, everybody! Welcome to the Aristocracy. How you guys all doing? I fixed my avatar. No technical issues today, so far. Normally, Sundays are just chill days, but I was talking with Anafrills yesterday, and we're like, you know what? Let's just have a chat, because she and I have been talking about what personality disorders are, what mental health, like different categorizations, and the politics behind it. Let's introduce you. So do you want to introduce yourself? To the chat, and feel free to also link your Twitch and all that stuff in chat too.
Oh, okay, sure. Yeah. I actually I go by Anavoir now, but it doesn't matter.
Okay, sorry.
It's fine. Yeah, hi, I'm Anna, and I am currently a master's student in clinical psychology with a specialization in trauma. Well, actually, I'm also currently in my practicum right now, so I am a therapist in training. I plan to get my PhD. My main goal after I graduate is, well, I want to get my license, but that's going to take 1,000 hours of seeing clients before I can actually do that.
Yeah.
Salty about it. And ultimately I want to, which I've wanted to do this for years now, be an expert witness in court cases on behalf of victims of trauma. So oftentimes in court cases, they need experts to come in and explain to juries about why a victim acted in this strange, to most people, it seems very strange. Victim behavior seems very strange and counterintuitive. And so usually they need an expert to come in and explain to juries that, nope, this is what victims do. This is, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So that's really what I want to do.
That's so cool. What got you interested in all of this stuff?
Oh gosh. I mean, first of all, my interest in psychology is due to well, I mean, it's kind of been for years I've been interested in it, but mostly because I've dealt with anxiety myself for most of my life.
Same.
I'm pretty open about my OCD. And I've had it since I was little even, and social anxiety,
Mm-hmm.
which Twitch has been helpful for, which is nice. But yeah, and so I've always sort of wanted to help people who've struggled with mental health issues, and then I just kind of decided you know what, maybe I'll just be a therapist. And yeah.
And so I guess for you there was a personal thing where you knew how much therapy helps people and you wanted to be a part of that solution, right?
Yeah, definitely. Because therapy's helped me so much throughout the years deal with my own anxiety. And it's kind of amazing seeing how it works.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah.
Yeah, because my instinct as a history lover and someone studying history is to not trust psychology, right? So I have all these trust issues with it, especially when you look at the history of psychology. I'm gonna sound like Tom Cruise right now. But when you look at a lot of the problematic history of psychology, especially when it comes to how they treated women,
Yeah.
but at the same time, for me, when my shit was against the wall, psychology saved my life, right? Like SSRIs. So I got completely proven wrong. So I do feel like I have this mixed bag. Do you ever have anxieties or trust issues with psychology itself, or do you think that a lot of that stuff is just a part of the stigma?
Basically, I don't really have any trust issues with psychology. I think I'm I tend to be almost the opposite, overly trusting. Yes, if an expert says it, it means it's true. I will listen to all the experts. So that's more so. But basically I know about the history and everything, because of course that's a pretty big aspect that you get taught about and stuff, because there's the lingering distrust is certainly understandable. Especially there's a lot of that among the LGBT community, of course. I mean, it's not like it was that long ago. It was in the DSM-3 that homosexuality was literally categorized as a mental illness. So
Yeah, and that psychology
yeah.
was literally used as the excuse to completely destroy their sexuality and like chemically castrate them and all that stuff, right? So
Yeah, I mean, I think that can be said for like other areas too, like even
yeah, for sure.
the area of genetics even too. Even like intelligence tests, those remain extreme. That's like probably one of the most controversial areas of psychology is the IQ tests, because there's a lot of racism, and also the ways that we have structured IQ tests have been mostly from because psychology has always kind of been male dominated, so, and especially whites, so like upper class, middle class whites.
Yeah.
So the tests have been like structured in that kind of with that like white male bias, and so that's something that's still talked about a lot, and it's something that's like the field is basically like actively like, yep, this is how it was, and we got to like change that. We got to make it way more multiculturally sensitive and stuff. And yeah, so I mean, it's definitely changed a lot, the field in general, especially from Freud's day. I mean, looking back at Freud, I mean, women weren't even allowed to be in the field because they were just thought to be like too emotionally unstable and stuff to be
Yeah,
able
not
to
surprised.
be therapists.
Didn't he also
Sorry?
sleep with his patients too?
I'm not you know what, I don't think I've heard of that, but he was inappropriate with them. Though interestingly enough, Freud actually made like this huge discovery in his etiology of hysteria. He wrote this, and he noted that so many of his female clients seemed to be basically like survivors of incest from like their fathers. And he was the
Wow.
first to point out that like actually I think hysteria seems to be caused by basically being sexually victimized by their dads. Like
So he was
all
right about that. I didn't
upper
know
class.
about that. That's interesting.
Yeah, the reason why not a lot of people know about the etiology of hysteria is because when Freud published it, he got so much backlash from his male colleagues. Like they were so pissed. He pretty much so he basically threw it away and rewrote it, and he came up with the whole what is it called, not the Oedipus complex, the Electra complex, and he kind of basically rewrote it and like kind of blamed the women basically. He was like, yeah, they come on to their dads basically. I'm serious. And so yeah, there was so much sexism that he was about to be like,
That's so interesting. So his initial
communicated.
instinct was right, but the societal pressures, I wonder how much that happens. Like societal pressures really affecting psychology, right?
Yeah. I know. I think like it's definitely something that happens even in research too. Like I know there's been like one case of like researchers like sort of hiding like data or something. I can't remember exactly, but I remember reading about it. I can't remember the exact case, but yeah, I remember it was like because they were worried about like the public's reaction or something about it. Yeah.
Yeah, that stuff gets really messy.
Yeah, it does. It does. Because technically, I mean, there's like ethical considerations too, of course. But yeah, so it's like, but yeah, like that's the thing that that's kind of why I'm like weirdly like fond of Freud, but also like, wow, you did some shitty things, Freud.
Dude, that is my relationship with everyone I admire in history, right? Like, like, wow, Henry VIII, you did some amazing work with, with separating from the Church of Rome, and you were really great at building out that navy. Okay, but damn, I don't know if the domestic violence is really bad.
Yeah,
So,
exactly. Yeah.
I have a question from one of my viewers.
Sure.
Let me scroll. Do you think people who have health issues are best suited to do therapy, or are the most mentally stable people suited?
Generally, it's really important to be psychologically healthy to do therapy, which is why,
Interesting.
yeah, because the thing is, if you, it's not like you have to be like totally perfect to be able to be a good therapist.
Mm,
It's just because everybody like my one professor says, everybody has their shit.
yeah.
But it's that you've had to have like you have to have like your stuff kind of like at least kind of under control, sort of.
Yeah.
To some extent. And that's why psych programs literally like look for that. I swear, like,
Do they really? Like, how do they test
yes.
for it?
um you don't really need to test people. Like, you can literally just observe people and notice
Okay.
that you can see trauma like you can see very obviously a person who has um like unresolved trauma issues, because there's certain behaviors and ways of just behaving and ways of thinking that strongly indicate trauma issues. Or you know, so it's like, and all my professors, they're PhDs in psychology, and they were like therapists themselves for like 20 years, so like they can easily identify that stuff. And we literally get this thing called a global review, which is basically like our our professors essentially like psychoanalyzing us.
What?
After every class, it's like yeah, if you don't do well enough, you can get kicked out of the program. Yeah. Like, if they notice that you have psychology issues, like psychological issues still that
Yeah.
maybe need addressing in therapy, you will be like brought into your advisor's office, and your advisor will talk to you about, like, it seems like you're still dealing with issues, and so it might be a good idea to like take a year off and get therapy, something like that. Because they're very much ethically obligated not to make people therapists who really won't be good therapists or possibly harm their clients. So yeah, it's
Yeah, but
actually
it's in that.
really
I
strict.
wonder if like they would get canceled in today's Twitter society, right? To like
No.
society, right? For the fact that they're discriminating against people with mental illness, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not really sure how that works. I mean, they're able to do it. I mean, because it just makes sense though, because I don't think
Yeah,
it would be a
discrimination in
good
some
idea.
areas makes sense, right?
Yeah,
Like
because
discrimination is bad when it's not due. Like,
right, yeah, when there isn't any like evidence behind the discrimination. But for being a therapist, we do know that therapists who are really not doing well psychologically themselves do
mhm.
often harm their clients. So
That's true.
yeah.
Isn't there a term for it where you're actually like putting like the therapist is actually putting something on their client, like transference or something?
So okay, so oh boy, I love talking about transference.
Oh, okay.
No.
Let's go for it.
Okay, so transference and countertransference naturally happens in the therapeutic relationship. It's not like a bad thing or anything. It's actually something that's good that you want to happen. You want like your client to, because it's sort of like a crucial part of therapy. It's what helps people to sort of deal with like and process things. And so one of the most common forms of transference, or countertransference I should say, is like the client will like project their own internal representation of like their mother or their father onto their therapist, depending on the gender.
Hmm.
um, and basically in therapy, that through that transference and countertransference relationship, they can deal with those unresolved issues that they've had with like their parents, for example.
Oh, that's so
um,
it can be a good thing.
yeah,
That's interesting.
yeah, it's a good thing usually. It it's not usually like, it's not really considered like a bad thing unless like the therapist um is like in denial or something about their own like countertransference reactions to the client or something. And as long as they kind of keep them in check, sort of, yeah, otherwise it's kind of a crucial part of therapy. And as long as also a therapist maintains their emotional boundaries, because it wouldn't be healthy for a therapist to get like too emotionally entangled with a client.
I used to
Yeah.
have this huge problem when I would do therapy because I used to suffer from really bad social anxiety disorder. Obviously, I don't have that anymore. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to be streaming or anything.
Yeah.
But when one of my problems was when I tried to seek therapy for social anxiety, I found myself just trying to like impress the therapist, right?
Yeah.
And
Common.
yeah, and like literally the anxiety was keeping me from being able to properly get treatment. It's like,
Yeah.
what do therapists do in that situation?
Basically, that's really not uncommon. We see that a lot, to be honest. And generally, like almost all clients kind of start out like that, wanting to sort of like please like the therapist and like
Mm,
um so like it takes some time, and some it depends. Like some clients who maybe have more trust issues, they will take like a longer time to like open up to with a therapist. But generally it's like um it's supposed to be that like, over time a therapist has to sort of display to the client that they're trustworthy, and that they're not going to like, break their trust, break confidentiality, and that they're emotionally like attuned with the client, um, and showing that like, the client's feelings are valid, things like that. Over time it's supposed to like kind of help clients to be able to open up more a little bit
mm.
by bit. Sometimes clients can take a long time to open up, to be honest. um but yeah,
The tough thing with that is that like it costs money, right?
it
Um,
does cost money, yeah.
so yeah, so it's like obviously the therapist needs to be paid, but yeah, this is the problem in general with like a financial system attached to healthcare, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and it's actually we have this issue like not all psychology and stuff is paid for in Canada as well. Um, so for me, it's always also like I'm thinking in my mind like I need to use this hour as much as possible because I don't know
Right.
how often I can afford this person. So I'm not even thinking in this like let's break these barriers down slowly kind of way. I've got that
Yeah.
on the back of my mind too.
Yeah, it sucks because like if you go too fast, you can like completely destroy the relationship with the client, and then like that's really not good because they may never like get therapy again, because
Hmm.
it might like, if they get like really freaked out or something, but from a therapist pushing them too much. So
Yeah.
that's what's kind of, it's really tricky. It's a really tricky thing to try and balance, like, because yeah, at the same time, like, I think generally, like therapists will sort of remind clients also, like, this is supposed to be for you, this is for your benefit, like you're paying for the session, and like so it's important to try and be honest, kind of thing.
Yeah.
um yeah. So, but like, yeah, there's a lot of it, the healthcare system is shitty. Also, wait, you're in Canada?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. It's definitely better there,
Yeah, it's
but
better, but we still have some issues with especially with therapy like with paying for that stuff like I luckily now I have some insurance
yeah.
that will cover some of that, but I think it only covers like 1,000 a year or something like that. That's like usually the standard, and that's not going to
Mhm.
cover you a lot of therapy, right? um Unfortunately, because like
Yeah.
therapy is usually like 150 or something.
Oh, yeah, it's around 150, yeah, per session.
One of my viewers had a question. um what does a therapist do if a client becomes personally dependent on them?
Oof. Yeah, that's something we really try and avoid, because therapy is supposed to foster like autonomy in clients.
Hmm.
But yeah, there certainly are clients that can become dependent on their therapist, and the therapist will basically, if they sense this is like happening, like the ethical thing to do is to kind of try and like just reinforce their, like just trying to reinforce their autonomy more. like a lot of times people will like come in and ask a therapist, well, what do I do? What's the right thing to do? Tell me what to do. Just tell me what to do.
Yeah.
Therapists can't do that. Like, that's why
Yeah, they're
giving
supposed to
advice,
arm you with the tools to be able to help yourself,
yeah,
right?
yeah, that's why giving advice is super controversial as a therapist, because you're really not supposed to give any advice to clients.
Mm.
Even in like some shitty, even in like abuse situations, like I tell people this and people like don't believe me, but it's like, no, seriously, you can't tell a client, even if they're a victim, you can't tell them like you should leave. Like, you still can't do that, because it's still fostering like dependence. They have to decide it for themselves, sort of. They have to learn to be more autonomous themselves. And
What do you
that's
do
what
in that situation? Like when a client's engaging in something that literally might kill them by like tomorrow.
I mean, it also does depend, of course. It does depend
Like on
on
like the level of danger.
yeah, the level of danger. Yeah, because obviously, like, well, it's still a tricky situation, though. That's the thing. Like, even in my ethics class, like, we had discussed this, and it's still a very tricky situation, because here's the thing. Like, our understanding of domestic abuse has changed quite a bit, even within the last decade. Like, things that we used to think, that, like, yeah, you gotta tell victims to leave right away, leave. But now we realize that that's actually wrong. Like, we probably shouldn't be doing that, because the most dangerous time for victims of at least like
It's right after they leave, right?
yeah, right after they leave,
Yeah.
or when they're thinking of leaving, when the abuser starts to catch on that, like, oh, they might be leaving. Yeah, that's the most dangerous
How
time.
sad is that? Like, the way to solve their situation is the way to make it worse.
Yep, and which could actually kill them. Like, that's when
Yeah.
almost all victims are killed, is when they
Yeah.
try to leave, or like caught cheating or something like that. But yeah, so yeah, that's why it's such a controversial thing, and that's why, like, basically people are trained now, like, don't just tell them to leave, don't do that. Like, you gotta help them come up with like an exit plan and stuff like that. But of course, this is for, like, keep in mind, this is for like very like physically abusive relationships, and like most abusive relationships are not
They're not physically abusive.
yeah, usually they're not, or like they're not severely physically abusive, which are like battering. They're not usually battering. It's more so you see like emotional and verbal abuse and stuff. But yeah, so and that can actually be resolved in therapy, which is another thing that we used to think, like, we used to think that, oh no, abusers can't ever change. Nope. And actually, no, that was wrong. We were wrong about that. The field was wrong about that. So now that's kind of handled differently as well.
So some abusers can change. Like, what are the necessary personality traits in an abuser, right? Yeah, like, what are the necessary personality traits, like, in an abuser that's going to make them more likely to change?
If they don't have a personality disorder, for one.
Okay.
That's a big one.
Yeah,
Because,
we'll be getting into that, yeah.
yeah, for sure. So if they have like basically if they're able to take criticism, that's a pretty key factor, without becoming like very like angered, sort of. If they don't have a presence of like trait anger.
What's trait anger?
So there's state anger, and then there's trait anger. State anger refers to someone getting really mad in reaction to the situation. So it's the situation that's sort of causing
Okay,
them
I
to
get
be
it. So angry by the state. Yeah.
But trait anger that's their personality. It's a part of their personality. They just get that angry as like is a part of like that's
It's like
part of how
it's like a part of how they deal with any issue.
their pattern. Yeah. Yeah. So
I think I know the types of people you're talking about. So that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, those are pretty key components. And also just like wanting to change. Honestly, even if a person has like trait anger, like even if they want to change, that's the best indicator if they genuinely do want to change and learn like healthier coping mechanisms to not be abusive and stuff.
Well,
So,
there
yeah.
are some personality, like not all the personality disorders are equal. Like they're obviously all very different from one another. So are there some personality disorders that are more likely to be able to change their behavior than others?
Yes. Yeah, there are generally, like, it's interesting because so all personality disorders are characterized by this like significant like lack of insight. Just want to like put that out there, but the ones that are most likely to change or like are like actually the cluster A, not paranoid though, except for paranoid.
Could you tell us
But
what the clusters are and all that?
sure, yeah. Okay, so cluster A is the odd and eccentric. That's literally the exact wording, odd and eccentric.
So are we talking about like a manic pixie dream girl like type person, or like a little more intense?
Dream girl. I don't think I know what that is. Sorry.
Oh, it's a film trope of just like a really quirky girl. You know,
No.
like yeah.
No,
So it's a little more intense than that.
yes, it's personality disorders are defined by significantly deviating from the social norms. So it's their patterns of thinking, their attitudes, and their behaviors that significantly do deviate from social norms, pretty much. So it's types of quirkiness that is not really, it's not normal. So things like there's schizotypal. So the cluster A personality disorders consist of paranoid, schizotypal, and schizoid personality disorder. Did I miss one? I think that's it.
So basically all of those things, like that means like schizoid, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have like schizophrenia or something, right? It just has to do with paranoia.
So it's not paranoia. Schizoid is very much like the loner personality disorder. They're characterized by not wanting to be emotionally close with anyone. They don't like being around people. There's a lot of psychologists suspect that there's a lot of schizoid individuals on the internet. I feel like every time I describe this personality disorder, there's someone in my chat that's like, oh, that sounds like me. But also people can have schizoid tendencies and not have like the full-blown personality disorder. But anyway, yeah, they're loners and they don't want an intimate relationship. They don't really have like well, I should say the most extreme ones, because there can be people with like more mild schizoid representation or adaptation, that can kind of want a relationship, but then it's like after like sometimes they've like tried relationships and they've left them, because they usually do, they're like, you know what, I don't think I want one anymore. But yeah, so why is
it's called schizoid?
So
rather than like antisocial personality disorder, because I would often think of antisocial as being that no, right? It's like kind of a mix-up.
Everybody gets this confused because here's the thing, right? Well, first of all, I'll say that the reason that it's called schizoid and like the other one is called schizotypal is because of their relationship with schizophrenia. These disorders are more common. These personality disorders are more common in people that have a family history of schizophrenia, and that's why they have that name that sounds like schizophrenia, basically. Yeah, because they do.
It's very confusing for me. They should change
relationship to it. Yeah. But anyway, so everybody like gets it confused, and sometimes I forget because I'm around like a lot of psych people. Sometimes I forget that, oh wait, right, people think antisocial means like just being like, so actually antisocial means like being contrary to the social norms and laws and of like one's culture, actually, and being actually kind of antagonistic to other people. That's actually what antisocial means.
So literally means like
asocial.
Yeah. That makes sense.
Yeah. So it's asocial, the term for like basically being like not very sociable and sort of a loner kind of. But
Hmm.
yeah, obviously this is just like a quick summary of them. But yeah, for some reason, like Dr. Eleanor Greenberg, who's like a specialist, one of the only ones in like schizoid personality disorder and personality disorders in general, but she always has noted that like all of her schizoid clients, they have a lot of insight, and they generally are like really willing to like um just like do the work in therapy. And yeah, they're more likely to be like able and willing to change, sort of, to an extent.
So if there's anyone in the audience that thinks they might be in that category, you can change, right? Like you can get
Yeah.
therapy, and
Oh
you're
yeah,
probably
yeah.
like you're set up the
Yeah.
best for that. And it's weird because I almost feel like out of all the personality disorders, like schizoid ones like get the most shit. I don't know. I
Really?
shouldn't say it's a competition, but um but yeah, they definitely get labeled as like the most so-called crazy, right? Out of all of them.
Possibly, yeah. I don't know if, like, honestly, I'm not sure how much. I think people honestly like don't even know a lot. Most people don't really know what schizoid even means. They hear it and they're like, "Oh man, that sounds crazy." Like the word just sounds crazy. Like,
Yeah.
so, yeah, it's kind of unfortunate because the word, like the term, is misleading. Kind of like the name of the personality disorder itself is almost like misleading.
Well, I've heard
Um,
that there's always like this push within like the naming circles, like to change names of things. Like I know there's a push now to change borderline because they feel like the name creates like a stigma and all of that stuff. But then
Borderline is a very controversial. I would say that borderline probably gets the most shit. People
oh,
with
okay,
borderline get
interesting.
the most shit. That's the one that probably carries like the heaviest stigma, though next to like narcissism as well. Narcissistic personality disorder, I mean. But
Hmm.
yeah, I think, yeah, borderline gets a lot of shit.
Does narcissist personality disorder like correct? I might be totally politically incorrect right now, but is there like does narcissist personality disorder kind of like deserve the shit though that they get? Because I've read a lot of stuff that people think that Ted Bundy was a sociopath, like or has antisocial personality disorder, but he actually didn't. He had malignant narcissism and narcissism personality disorder.
Yeah. Ted Bundy had like 3 different personality
Okay.
disorders, honestly. Like, Ted Bundy also scored extremely high on the hair psychopathy checklist. So technically
Oh.
he was a psychopath. Yeah, I think he was like one of them that got like the full score of it or something. I can't, you know what? Now it's, can't remember, or he like got a really high score. But yeah, and basically, so here's the thing. These get very confusing, all these different terms like sociopath and psychopath. And
Mhm.
so I'll just quick like clarify, just
Yeah. Yeah. Please.
yeah, because even I was confused before I actually learned about all this shit. So the term sociopath is really more of like a colloquial term, and it just refers to someone who has antisocial personality disorder. Um, Psychopath, though, that refers to something different. That refers to a more like, I guess, like some people theorize it's more a more extreme form of antisocial personality disorder. But so, um, a psychopath refers to factor 1 psychopathy, which is very much um, characterized by primarily the cold, callous affect. Sometimes it's called shallow affect. It means that they pretty much don't have normal human emotions. um,
Oh, that's interesting because I heard sociopaths. Sorry, I should say people with antisocial personality disorder. They still have emotions and stuff. They
yes,
just have a hard time with empathy. Um,
yes, yeah,
but yeah, but people with psychopathy, that's like they're literally like zero emotions inside as well.
yeah, yeah, pretty much. Yep. Um, and that's the difference between factor 1 psychopathy and factor 2 psychopathy. factor 2 psychopathy is what essentially is correlated with like antisocial personality disorder more, because that's the one that's more like impulsive. They get bored really easily. They need a lot of like their brains need a lot of stimulation, or they get bored. So things like they'll be like really risk taking. They often do things that like put their own life in danger, but then put others.
It's a lot of criminal behavior caused by people with those disorders.
Yeah. In the prison population, you see significantly higher levels of sociopathy, well, antisocial personality disorder. It's just like easier to say that word, and psychopathy. Yeah. But the thing is that people with antisocial personality disorder are way more likely to get caught because they're so impulsive and very reckless. Psychopaths are not, because they can play the long con. They can be cold and calculating, and they can be patient, and they can wait 20 years to like exact their revenge on someone or whatever.
It's fucking terrifying. Yeah, I'm not that patient. Like whenever I'm mad at someone and I want revenge on them, I'm like, I'm so mad at them, I'm gonna sleep on it, and then I wake up in the morning, I'm like, I'm over it.
Yeah. I mean, that's normal, you know.
Yay. Okay.
I mean,
I'm not a terrible person.
Like, no, like feelings like aren't a bad thing. Feelings don't mean actions, basically. Like just because like people can feel that like, oh, I want revenge, or like feel like, man, I really want to punch that person in the face, but like not actually do it. So yeah.
Well, I heard that this is the hardest thing about when you're studying like pedophiles, right? I'm talking about like the psychological definition of pedophile, right? It means you're like exclusively attracted to children. So I heard that like the problem is that the only people that psychologists get to study are ones that are already in prison, which means they've already acted on it. And that's already a very specific, type of the population, because it takes, because there are probably a ton of people that are pedophiles technically, but they don't act on it, so they don't have other personality disorder traits that combine to actually make them an abuser, right?
Yeah, actually, that's the really interesting thing, is that the ones who act on it tend to have higher levels of personality pathology, and especially narcissism.
Yeah, that's what I heard. They're narcissists because they value their own pleasure over someone else's pain.
Yeah, it's theorized that it's the narcissism that leads to the offending sort. I mean, there's a whole bunch of factors that, of course, contribute to actually offending, but like the narcissism seems to be like a key difference. The higher levels of narcissism, which is tested using the NPI, the Narcissistic Personality Inventory. It's a very like reliable, valid, like empirically validated measurement of narcissism.
Someone asked, aren't there also dopamine differences in people with psychopathy that drive impulsivity? I feel like I read something about that.
Yes, there is. It has to do with the brain's reward system, sort of. But it's just that like, so yeah, it's like the dopaminergic cycle in the brain, which is the brain's reward system. And they're very much like, this is the thing with so like sociopaths, they're very primitive in the sense that like they're very much just kind of driven by like that dopaminergic cycle, sort of. It's like they just kind of want to do things that just feel good.
Well, there's this huge idea, especially from the media, that people who are sociopaths or people with ASPD are like these like brilliant these brilliant evil monsters or whatever, right? But obviously, like from what I've read, and you can tell me if it's not true, that the majority of people with ASPD actually score lower on IQ tests, right? Like, and that's like a misconception.
I think it's mostly average or a bit lower. I don't think there's really any much significant difference in like their IQ from others. I don't think. The only reason it might be like, because I could have sworn it was like mostly average to like below average. The only reason it might be more like below average is because
you know what? I got it confused. I just realized I was thinking of serial killers. Yeah,
Yeah.
I realized that I was thinking that the majority of
Oh,
serial killers have very have low IQs. They're not like brilliant. Yeah.
okay. Yeah, you know what? I'm not actually familiar with that, but I do know there's been a lot of um like high profile serial killer cases where they were actually like genius level IQ. I think Ted Bundy was one of them, right? I think, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I
But
think
yeah,
people always think when they think of serial killer, they think of someone brilliant like Ted Bundy, but the majority of them are not like that. Like,
yeah, yeah. And you know what? I think, wasn't it the Golden State Killer or something, who also had a really high IQ and he got away with it for so many years? I don't know. I might be confusing them. I watch a lot of true crime.
no, so do I. So do I. I'm like obsessed with it. Okay.
Yeah. But yeah, most are just, most if anything are, low. I mean, there's a lot of theories, of course, of what makes a serial killer. Some are like, oh, traumatic brain injury, things like that. We don't really know yet. That's a tough one to say. There's like some things that like there's some warning signs like in childhood, that like are supposed to predict if a kid like grows up to be like a serial killer.
Yeah, I
But
heard there was like this triad of things, right?
yes,
Like
yeah, there's
the
a triad.
fire. That's why I always joke with my
Supposedly,
friend Doopy that he's got it right because like because he
Doobie's a little
started a
dark
few
triad.
yeah, because he started a fire as a kid um and
Yeah,
yeah,
starting
and I think
fires.
he once had like an accident with like a kid in I don't know, something like that.
Yeah,
But
there's a theory that like, it's supposed to be like three main things, I believe, and it's like, I think it's like bedwetting, setting fires, and
bedwetting,
turning
yeah.
animals. But it hasn't, but it's not perfect. This theory, basically, it's not always correct.
You see, okay, the
Essentially.
fires thing makes sense to me, right? Okay.
Yeah.
The torturing young animals makes sense to me.
Yeah.
But like bedwetting, like that
Yeah.
just seems like such a strange thing.
That's because the thing is, bedwetting is also a major sign of a kid being abused. So yeah,
And abuse often
is,
like yeah, that makes sense.
yeah, so it's like, well, it could be, yeah, sure, it could be psychopathy, but it also could just be that the kid's being abused. So it's
Yeah.
like,
So it might be just like an abuse can lead to stuff like that too.
definitely. I mean, absolutely. I mean, I've never heard of a serial killer that didn't have an abusive childhood, of course, but
I think Ted
I mean,
Bundy is an example, right? He would always talk about how his parents were like perfect and stuff, but maybe that was his narcissism.
yeah. They say that, but like, no. Yeah, that's more so like, yeah, those people. Here's the thing, like, people also tend to like have biases, of course, too, about like their own experiences with like their parents and stuff. And narcissists do tend to like basically sugarcoat their childhood and like their parents. Like, they tend to be like, no, my parents were fine, like everything was great, they were great, I was fine, like no problems, no trauma. But then like they'll say that like, I don't know, they'll like say things that indicate to you that like,
Yeah, if you ask them like specifics, like that's kind of messed up.
Yeah, and usually like what a common theme for people who grow up to be narcissists is emotional neglect. That's like the thing that seems to lead
Emotional
to
neglect.
people developing more narcissism. Yeah, emotional neglect from their parents or caregivers.
But like I feel like everyone's talking about the opposite, that children today are getting so messed up because they're getting so much attention by like these helicopter parents. Is all that stuff bullshit? Is like, attention and emotional attention just like always good?
So now this requires a bit of talk about attachment.
Yeah.
So like, okay, basically, it's good. It is actually good to give kids attention, essentially. Like, you want to be responsive to children when they're like crying or distressed. That's what is required to develop a secure attachment pattern with your child. Otherwise, the child's going to have an insecure attachment pattern with their parent. And so basically, an attachment pattern is just like, and everyone has one. It's our pattern. It's basically our pattern of like how we are in interpersonal relationships. It's like our way of interacting and behaving with other people. And it starts in, God, some psychologists theorize it starts like when you're still a fetus in your mother's womb. So, but yeah, it starts at like infancy, basically. I mean, you can even see evidence of this. I don't know if you've ever seen, have you ever seen the still face experiment with babies?
No, what's that?
So the still face experiment is they have these infants and their mothers or fathers, usually they use the mothers, but like, and they'll have the mother, like they'll pick up the baby and like hold their baby, and they have the mother just have a neutral face. The babies become extremely distressed at like just a neutral face, because the mother's not like smiling at the baby and like
that's so interesting,
like, baby noise things like, oh hi sweetie, like, yeah, they become extremely distressed from the lack of reaction and the lack of like showing warmth and reflecting. Like, yeah, it's really interesting. So like that in itself, it severely distresses babies. And so that already, like if you have a very cold, distant parent, that's already like setting a kid up to have an insecure attachment pattern.
Would you say that there are probably a lot of parents that want to be that attached to their children, right? They want to do all the right things, but they just don't have the time.
Yes.
Especially parents living in poverty or like single mothers, like, or anything like that, right? Do you think, like, I always had this theory, because my audience knows that I'm like I'm really, I guess my bad qualities come out when I start talking about like criminal behavior, and stuff like that. I'm not very leftist on that. So, would you say that a good way, I guess, I'm trying to think how to phrase this question in the way that's not going to get me canceled. But, okay, do you think that having some kind of system, instead of focusing so much on dealing with the criminals after the fact, but preventing like criminal behavior by like incentivizing or literally even paying people to be mothers or fathers or like just primary caregivers, do you think that would actually prevent a lot of crime?
Oof. Well, yeah, I mean, honestly, I think it definitely would help. Yeah. I mean,
but is it financially viable? Like, would it save us money like later in the end?
Problem, right? Like, theoretically, yeah, that actually would certainly reduce crime. Like, if we had kids, like less kids who were like emotionally neglected and stuff, and less kids who were, abused. And when I say abuse, I mean emotional neglect is abuse. So it's a form of child abuse.
And not a lot of people realize that neglect is abuse. So if you were neglected as a child like that, you're a victim of abuse.
Even emotionally neglected, like even if the parents provided like financially and like for food and like got all their physical needs, that's still not enough. The emotional neglect portion is still such a huge piece, and that's also what you find in the backgrounds of people with like all the dark triad personalities. Emotional neglect is a common theme in their childhood. So basically, like, I mean, cold parents raise cold children.
That's interesting. Yeah. Well, I've met a lot of people who have been victims of abuse, and they're like determined to not have children themselves. because they're so afraid. They know how traumatic it was, the way they were raised, and they're so afraid of doing the same thing to them. Like, what would you say to those people?
Honestly, I would say that like just the fact that they're really scared of like inflicting that like how do I say this, like just the fact that they're scared of like doing the same thing, like repeating like the cycle, and
It almost
just
means
the
it
fact that
they're less
they're
likely
very,
to do it.
yeah, like that
Yeah.
shows already that like that they're willing to have that insight and willing to like listen to get like there's parenting classes and stuff you could take.
Yeah.
There's like you can talk with like a therapist and stuff on like, yeah, there's definitely like a lot of options that, and I would say that they probably shouldn't like just swear off having kids.
Yeah, it always feels like, I don't know, it always feels like the people I know who are set on not having kids are the ones who should have kids, and the ones who do have kids are the ones who shouldn't.
Oh my
Right?
God.
That's like always how it feels.
Dude, I seriously think that way too. I'm always like, why is it always the people that shouldn't have kids? Like, oh
Yeah,
my
I know.
God, right?
It's like the ones who are willing to be self-critical and think as a consequence of like what they're doing to society and all that stuff, they're the ones that are actually going to be the great parents, right?
Yeah, they are. Yeah, who don't get like super defensive or like are in denial or anything like that, because you need to be able to take criticism, because you really do, because that's kind of, I mean, that's how we're able to gain more insight, and that's how we're able to change and stuff. And because like it doesn't have to be someone with like a personality disorder. Like all of us from time, like all of us have blind spots, basically. Like everyone does. It's just a part of human nature where like we're not
I don't know what you're talking about, Anna. Like,
yeah, we're not aware of something that we do or whatever. That's just normal. And so like it is really important to be able to take criticism well, and not just like brush it off, totally dismiss it. That's like,
and I think about my own life. Like my parents had, I think there were some parts of my childhood that I had some neglect, and I think I resented my parents for a long time, like associated with that. But over time, like we've been able, they're willing to, look at themselves and fix certain behaviors and stuff. And that made me want to fix certain behaviors. It was like a good lesson for me. And now we have like, I actually don't know anyone that has a close relationship with their parents, like as an adult. So like, and it wasn't always that way. So it can totally get fixed.
Yeah, it absolutely can. And that's always what I tell people, like, don't give up on your relationship with your parents just because like you've had like because there are certainly a lot of people who will like, I just don't talk to my parents anymore. And sometimes I get it. Sometimes it's like their parents are just so abusive and dangerous that like they just can't even have a relationship with them. But for most times I tend to encourage people like, there's family therapy and stuff like that, and like you really can improve the relationship. And
when is it for those people who have been facing, I guess, neglect or any kinds of, I don't know, like I was gonna say casual abuse because I didn't want to get into like really, but that feels like a bad term to use. But your mic is a lot louder than Anna's.
Is my mic low? Oh crap.
Yeah, maybe raise it a little.
Okay.
I raised you the max amount for me.
Is this better?
Yes, a lot better.
Okay, good. Fuck, I always have this problem where my mic is too low.
Oh yeah. So what was I saying? Parents. Oh, okay. So what line is it like where you should cut your parents out, right? Because like there's like how do you know? And I know it's hard for you to say because you don't know the specifics of the situation, but like what tools can we give people like when something is a really unhealthy relationship for them, and it's better to just move on.
I can't say because like well, it's because like it's very hard. I don't really want to ever encourage people to like distance from like family and loved ones and stuff, but I
Mm-hmm.
mean sometimes people do feel like they have to, and like I understand that. um and I would say that like before, like cutting out should be like the very 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 last resort, of course. But
Mm-hmm.
there are like tools that you could use, I guess. I don't know, do you mean tools like I don't know, like they're like there's distancing techniques, like you can sort of emotionally distance yourself from your parents so that things that they say, if they're like very emotionally abusive, like it won't hurt you as much, like you can learn these techniques sort of.
Oh, I
um
just meant like just being able to realize, because
oh
we have like this attitude that, you know, you've got to be attached to your family no matter what. But I've always disagreed with that, because I don't know, I feel like every relationship is earned, like every day, like as a consequence, of people's like behavior and all that stuff. So, and I see people, and I see like my friends like in these relationships with their parents, that I don't know, it feels like their parents just get away with doing some of the most like atrocious things,
mm,
from like abusing them financially to abusing them like emotionally, and
mhm.
I don't know, they're not, to me, fulfilling like that role as what I imagine a parent should be filling. So like I just wonder
Yeah.
like how does someone know like when, you know, when to be like, oh, this is just like normal family issues, like normal family conflict, versus this is unhealthy
Yeah.
for me and I need to move away.
Yeah, definitely. Sometimes it can be tough. I know that like research does show that it's normal for people to basically like sometimes have fights where there's like yelling and they'll say mean things in anger. Like this is normal, and it's been observed in literally like every like intimate relationship, and also like family relationships.
Hmm.
So that's an example of like normal, but like, and by yelling I mean like raising their like people, it's normal that people will like raise their voice, like kind of like if they're getting heated or whatever in an argument. But
Yeah.
like what, for example, what crosses the line into abuse is like if a person always yells in an argument, or if a
Hmm.
person starts like screaming at the other to,
Yeah.
so like,
Oh,
yeah.
I do not do well screaming. When someone screams at me, I
Oof.
just immediately shut down and I just
Yeah.
disassociate.
Yeah, it's scary. Like it's very intimidating. Yeah. Um so like that's obviously not normal. Like screaming at someone in anger. Like people raise their voice and people like yell kind of at each other.
Hmm.
Like that's normal, but yeah. And so then the other thing is that like if if a parent tends to like, if their go-to is like attacking, is like personal attacks, like when they're getting mad or something, if their go-to is like, well, you're a shit person, or something, like something that attacks the person as a person.
Yeah.
That So there's a really big difference between like um criticism and like actually just attacking the person for who they are, the individual at their core. So that's something that Dr. Gottman talks about too. He's my
Yeah.
favorite. I love Dr. Gottman.
Why do you like him?
He's like he's like the expert on relationships, intimate relationships. He's able to like basically predict with like, what is it, 95% accuracy, just from if he observes a couple how they argue, he's able to predict whether they're like going to get divorced or like break up, if they'll last or not, with
What?
like 95% accuracy or something. He's done a lot of research in the area of intimate relationships too. But yeah, I like him.
That's interesting. Can there ever be a problem where like, I know that I have a tendency, I think just because like I'm trying to be a scholar and everything, I have a tendency to overthink everything
Me
from,
too.
from like trying, I don't know, like if I just wake up one day and I'm like, why do I want a croissant today instead of this kind of bread? Like, and then I'm going to like analyze that shit. So I feel like I sometimes have a tendency when I'm in friendships, relationships, anything like that to really kind of overanalyze it psychologically, and I'm the
Me
least
too.
qualified person to be doing that, right? Just putting that out there. Literally all my knowledge is coming from Google and like Wikipedia. So,
Yeah.
so is there like, can there sometimes be like a danger, of, using these ideas in psychology and stuff, and like yourself and potentially causing harm that way, especially when you're like diagnosing people in your head?
Yes. Yeah,
Because I
definitely.
do that all the time, and I feel like it's really bad.
Yeah, I've done that too.
Yeah, it's like it's hard not to, right? Because like human beings, we just love finding patterns and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard because like to some extent we all do categorize, and like we do, it's just the way our brain works. But
Mm.
yeah, it can definitely be harmful because like, you know, these a lot of these psychological concepts are far more complicated than like people really realize, and so like they could be misapplying them,
Mm-hmm.
or like too quick to apply them or something. Like I've done that myself even, where like I thought someone was like a narcissist, but then like, oh wait, I was wrong, they weren't.
Mm.
Yeah.
No,
And
there's definitely some people in my life where I'm like, yeah, you've got a narcissist personality disorder, and I like fully diagnose them in my head, and I know that I'm so unqualified to do that, and that's why I never like talk about it, because I mean that would be like the worst.
yeah,
But yeah, in my head, I'm totally doing that stuff,
yeah,
and
yeah.
I just feel like it's a very bad thing to do.
Yeah, I mean, like it's best to keep in mind that like, well, you know what, actually, just because they could have like some more like narcissistic behaviors or whatever doesn't necessarily even mean that they have the personality disorder.
Mm.
And also it could be the situation maybe that's bringing out those behaviors or something.
Yeah, I heard
Yeah.
substance abuse particularly can often bring
Yes.
out, make it
Yeah.
look like the behaviors are more
Yeah.
prevalent than they really are.
Yeah, yeah. Or like even just like the person might be going through abuse or something like that, or like a traumatizing situation. So it might not necessarily be reflective of like their personality. So that's why it's like really important to be careful, sort of, when applying things like that. Yeah.
Okay, does this explain why when I play, have you ever heard of the game Rust?
Hmm.
Okay, so like my friends hate playing Rust with me because they say that I become like a full like narcissist, sociopath, like dark triad, like the most evil person in the world.
Oh no.
And normally I'm like, I'd like to think I'm the opposite of that, but I don't know, in Rust, like I have like this anger in my chest. Like that's how I feel. I'm like, oh, like I'm just so angry and I just want to get back at everyone and I just want to kill everyone. It's just like, and yeah, I feel like if someone met me in that game, they would definitely think that I was super messed up.
Maybe you're just like channeling your anger or something in video games.
Would you
I
say
don't
that's
know.
healthy or unhealthy?
Um, I think it can. It's like not necessarily unhealthy at all. I think the only way it would become unhealthy is if like I don't know, uh, like maybe that was like the only way you expressed anger or something. That's the only way it would like be unhealthy. Since like it's really important to like express our feelings in general. We shouldn't like bottle them up. Even anger. It's
Yeah.
just like yeah. You want to
Okay,
like
but bottling up my emotions feels good. So, like,
wait, bottling your emotions feels good, you said?
yeah, it feels like I know that everyone tells you need to talk about them, but it feels like when I talk about them, it makes it worse, right?
Worse.
And so
Mhm.
it feels like when when I hide them and I put them deep dark like under the bed or something,
Yeah.
I don't it's like it's almost like a fake it till you make it, where it's like I'm faking
Yeah.
myself that I'm happy, and then eventually it actually does happen, because eventually like
Yeah.
time goes by and I have moved on emotionally from that subject.
Yeah. That's basically suppression. Like, it's suppressing emotional suppression,
God damn it.
which is so in psychology, it's recognized as probably one of like the most toxic
Oh
ways to
no.
deal with emotions. Yeah, it's not good because it actually is correlated with like actually like harming your physical health. It actually has an impact on your physical health to
No
like
way, really?
suppress emotions. Yeah. Um, the other thing is that also when people do, because like, okay, I do that, like, I also have that. That's like always been my coping mechanism as well,
Mhm.
is suppressing my emotions, um, especially like anger and stuff, because women aren't allowed to be angry. You're not supposed to be angry. It's supposed to always be
Yeah.
nice. um, otherwise, it makes you a bitch. But like,
Just play Rust. It's totally accepted there.
but oh yeah, so like when people do actually do that, it ends up coming out passive aggressively, without like people's awareness or control. So like, yeah.
Oh, you're so
um,
right about that. You're so right about that.
yeah, it's really weird because like it's not like people, like, passive aggression isn't something that people usually do intentionally. It's something that is actually just like like an unconscious thing. It's literally just like anger that people have suppressed leaking out, basically.
Mhm.
But yeah, it's so that's like one of the major reasons why I've tried like really hard over the years to like express my emotions and stuff and not let things go. Cause I used to always try and let things go. Just like, okay, nope, that bothers me, but I don't know, I'll just let it go. And then, nope, it wasn't good. It was really bad. And it's harmful to relationships too. So yeah, now
Um,
I try and be like, okay, I'm going to talk about it. I'm going to let them know this bothers me. I'm going to let them know.
well, ironically, when I'm playing Rust, I am telling everyone my anger. I'm
Yeah.
expressing it a lot, right? Like,
Yeah.
especially I get really frustrated, where I feel like I'm doing all the work,
Mhm.
I'm hitting all the trees, and
Yeah.
I have like the whole plan and everything, and everyone else is just dilly-dallying, not taking it seriously, and they're still gonna complain when they're still gonna complain when we get raided, and they're not gonna figure out the defense. So
Yeah.
yeah, so I yell at them all the time about that. But
Oh,
yeah,
that's
but that
funny.
also really annoys people. Okay, so when it comes to personality disorders, so
Mhm.
we actually got through, that was like a long segue. We got through section A. So is that what it's
Yeah,
called?
yeah.
Cluster A.
Cluster.
And so what are the other clusters?
I should say though that the one personality disorder in cluster A that's not likely to that therapy is not very effective with is paranoid personality disorder, because
Oh,
just to give
interesting.
a description of that, paranoid personality disorder is very much primarily manifests in basically they kind of they very hostile
Mm,
towards people, like, and generally it's like almost always they're suspecting and accusing their partner of cheating and being unfaithful, or like doing things behind their
interesting.
back, or trying to destroy them or something. It's very, very stressful, and to like kind of um, be in a relationship with someone with that personality disorder. Yeah, and so
And it must be
sometimes
stressful
also,
being that person, right? Like, because
yeah,
you're always,
definitely.
I can just imagine, like, when I felt paranoid, I think I
Yeah,
have some issues with paranoia. Um, but for me, I feel like, especially running a Discord and being an online personality, like, it's kind of worked in my favor,
yeah,
but to protect myself. But I can only imagine people who feel that to, like, an extreme
yeah,
way, that it's like, it must be terrified to always feel like everyone is out to get you.
yeah, absolutely. It's very stressful to live like that because they genuinely think that. They genuinely see like what to them looks like evidence and suspicious behavior
Yeah, and
from
it's not them
friends.
being manipulative. Like, they genuinely are just terrified.
Yeah. I mean, that's the case with all personality disorders, is that like they don't really mean to be manipulative, except maybe with antisocial personality disorder and narcissism.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, people kind of, the impact of their behavior tends to feel like people feel like this is really manipulative. But to the person with the personality disorder, they're seeing a different reality. They genuinely are seeing a different reality from what everyone else is seeing.
Mhm.
And that kind of is because of distorted perceptions. But I could get more into those then, especially with talking about cluster B. Cluster B is the next one. The
Yeah.
cluster B
Let's hear about this
personality
one.
disorders. So these are the dramatic and what is it? Dramatic and
Dramatic sounds like
dramatic.
a nice way to
dramatic
call them drama
disorder.
queens.
Yeah, I mean it's interesting because that's I know that's one of the words that's in the DSM, the dramatic personality cluster sort
Oh,
of.
I thought you were going to say drama queen. I was like, really? Okay.
Um I can't remember the other terms that's used to describe them. Oh, the dramatic and erratic. That's right. It rhymes. Dramatic and erratic cluster. So yeah, then cluster B includes antisocial personality disorder, borderline, narcissistic, and histrionic personality disorder. Histrionic is a really interesting one because a lot of people get it wrong. Like, people think that histrionic personality disorder is basically just being like a drama queen. It's actually not. Histrionic personality disorder is characterized by people having this pattern of tending to think that they're like closer with people than they actually are. Like, but it's in the sense that like they'll meet someone, like the first day they meet someone and they'll be like, wow, I feel like we're best friends now. The
Yeah.
first day.
If
So
anything,
it's
I
like-
feel like that's the stereotype of what, most society would consider like crazy, right? I know that that's like you're not supposed, that's a bad term to use. But the way,
yeah.
we could get into that in a bit, but yeah, like usually like the stereotype, especially particularly with women, where like a woman gets like attached like right away. Like, how many horror movies have we seen like with that kind of idea?
The trope, yeah, for sure. And there are some issues with the way histrionic personality disorder is diagnosed, because there is a bit of sexism. Like, more women are diagnosed with it than men, and the concern is that like clinicians are like having like sexist biases and stuff, and men are like, there's actually an issue of men being very underdiagnosed with like, so histrionic and borderline men being very underdiagnosed, because both those disorders have a history of being overwhelmingly diagnosed in women because of stereotypes and tropes, sort of sexist biases. So yeah, it actually, like, a lot of men get missed, or they just get, like, the men will sometimes get diagnosed with like antisocial personality disorder when really they have borderline. So yeah, or narcissism. They'll get diagnosed as like misdiagnosed as like narcissistic when really they're borderline.
It's weird to me though that like I understand why antisocial and narcissist personality disorder is in the same cluster, but it seems weird that like borderline's in there, right? Because obviously, like, I know borderline, one of the symptoms is like chaotic personal relationships, but it doesn't seem like they're as like malicious, I guess, as the way I would often put like narcissist and antisocial personality disorder in.
Yeah, you have to remember that it's the dramatic erratic cluster. So like they're not like grouped together based on like the malignant sort of or like it's because I would agree with you. And I mean, there certainly is a lot of controversy around it. There's a lot of clinicians that do not like the way the DSM categorizes personality disorders. They want it to change. So yeah, I mean, we might see a change in like future DSM releases. I don't know. It'll be interesting, but yeah. But anyway, with histrionic, what I was going to say also is that like, which also like you have to remember there's a fuck ton of overlap between all these personality disorders. Oh, that's another part of the controversy, is that there's so much overlap.
Really? So someone can have more than one?
Oh, no, it's not that. It's that like the symptoms overlap so much with so many of them. Like what I described with histrionic, the whole like getting really super close with someone, like who they just met and like really attached, like that's also seen in borderline.
Yeah.
That can also be seen in narcissistic personality disorder too, because
that's interesting.
Yeah, because they all go through the idealize, devalue, discard cycle. Do you know about that?
No. What is this? Tell me all about it.
Okay, so this is how personality disorders kind of tend to have romantic relationships. And it's primarily like, it varies across different personality disorders, but it's primarily known for being really destructive in borderline personality disorder and narcissistic personality disorder. So they're different phases of the relationship, basically. So the idealize cycle is like when someone with NPD or BPD like first meets someone, they idealize them, essentially. They put them on this pedestal and they're like, wow, this person is really special. Like, oh my God, they're like nobody I've met before and they're really great. And they're viewing this person as like all positive and like as it's unrealistically good and positive.
Yeah.
So that's like the
Doesn't everyone do a little bit to that?
Yeah,
to an extent.
Yeah, a little bit to some extent. Yeah, everyone does. It's just with this cycle, it's more extreme, because
so at the level at which they do it, right?
Yeah,
because I feel like whenever I meet someone and I think that they're really cool, I'm like, oh, this person's so cool. I really want to be their friend. And it's like there's like a honeymoon period where like I think that they just will not have any negative qualities. But you're saying about like it's not like that. It's like taking that to a whole new level.
Yeah, they basically like almost don't recognize that like the person has flaws, like everyone does, and that there's going to be negative things essentially that the person does once you get to know them more. like any relationship.
Yeah.
And so then when the person does fuck up and it shows that they're human, that's when they fall from the pedestal and the devalue. Then the devalue cycle happens. Yeah. The phase happens where it's like, and this is referred to, this is what I talk about a lot with, that's splitting. The tendency to go from the idealized to quickly snapping, like right away, like doing a 180, going to like the devalue, like, wow, this person's a piece of shit. They're horrible. They're just a fucking abuser. They're just a terrible person. And when people with personality disorders, when they split like that, and they're in that devalue cycle, they can't remember. Like, this is what's really fascinating that clinicians have observed, is that they can't even really like remember like the positive things that they liked about the person. They can't even
really
like recall it. Yeah. And that's what's kind of scary too. Like, also,
so it's like wiped from their brain.
Not really. It's just that it's kind of suppressed. It's suppressed. They're not really thinking about it. They're just so focused on the negative, and they're so like convinced that this person's just a terrible person. And they're just all bad, and they didn't realize it. until now.
But
And
that's what feels so scary for me, I guess.
yeah,
Like when
it is
I'm
scary.
dealing and I don't want to stigmatize, right? But
Yeah.
if I'm dealing with someone that has that personality disorder, like it's so scary that I can fuck up and I'm inevitably going to fuck up, right?
Yes.
And then just boom, like I'm now the enemy. And like that's kind of terrifying, right?
It is really terrifying. I've experienced this with like some people. I had friends. Like I've experienced the idealized, devalue, discard cycle with some friends in like in the past who were diagnosed with like borderline personality disorder. And yeah, it was literally like one thing that like I said, and it was just suddenly like the person just split on me, and they were like, well, you're just a horrible person and all this shit, and then just like discarded me, and like that was it. Like I was deemed to be this terrible like person and stuff over like one mistake. And that's how it is. Yeah, that's how it is. Or even just like two mistakes or something that are like literally like normal human mistakes. But yeah. And yeah,
I've heard that
really
that everyone splits to an extent, right? Is that true?
So no, because splitting is primarily associated with personality disorders.
Okay.
Though people can have, like, they can obviously have very mild, like mildly idealize and devalue a person. But that's people with an insecure attachment pattern. Because
so you can have that and not have a personality disorder, right?
Yeah, but it's not going to be like, you're not going to see someone who goes through this same cycle of like getting involved with people and discarding them, like getting involved, burning the bridge, getting involved, burning the bridge, getting involved, discarding. Like that's going to be something you see with personality disorders. Like they have a long history of like discarding people essentially. So yeah, that's kind of how, and that's part of the diagnostic criteria for borderline is a chaotic relationships, and meaning like they're discarding people a lot. Like no, it's almost like nobody's like good enough and up to their level, sort of.
Yeah.
Almost like, yeah.
I had this problem. Like I've dealt with depression for most of my life, right? And I had this problem when I get really depressed. I told you, like, I like to just push all my feelings inside. And I, especially one of my biggest symptoms of depression is I become really irritable. And I'm very like self-aware about the irritability, and I hate the idea of doing that to my friends. So I have like this tendency to just, when I get really depressed, I just like pull back and I just like completely avoid my friends for months, sometimes to like years, right? And because of that, it's caused chaos, right? Like, I guess it's caused me to lose lots of friends, like, over time. And the ones who have, I guess, stuck it out are the ones that are like willing to deal with that. As much as it sucks, like they're willing to just like accept me back after those months, or something afterwards. But yeah, like I just wonder, like, would that be characterized as something like so that's not technically, wouldn't be like BPD?
No, that's not the idealized, devalue, discard cycle. No, that's just being like, that's just basically like a more of like a maladaptive coping mechanism. That's all that is. Yeah.
So I just suck at coping. That makes sense.
Yeah, just unhealthy coping. Yeah, because generally any coping that like has a tendency to ruin relationships is maladaptive. Yeah.
Well, okay. I feel like there's probably, I'm guessing, if there's anyone, for the people who are watching this, there's probably some people that are anxious, like, as they're hearing some of this stuff, and you're like, oh, like, I feel like I've split a few times, or all of that stuff. Like, what would you say to, like, to people who are anxious that maybe they have a personality disorder?
Okay, so basically, it's important to keep in mind that when someone has a personality disorder, they split on people like a lot. Like I said, like that's kind of the big thing, is that it's with it's with almost everyone, sort of.
Yeah, it's like a regular pattern that's always happening.
Yeah, it's the pattern, and the fact that like this has been going on for years and years, that they've been sort of like experiencing this like splitting, and especially like a really big thing with personality disorders. It's like the core part of personality disorders is their inability to maintain stable long-term relationships and friendships. That is like the biggest thing with personality disorders. And so that's something that you got to keep in mind. So
well, because everyone, okay, I shouldn't say everyone splits, but I do think that there is a good evolutionary reason to split, right? Even though I know that, and like, I'm interested to hear what you think about it.
It's a primitive mechanism. It is a
to like put people, into like, this is enemy, this is friend, and because in those split seconds of when you need to survive, like, it's really important to just see in black and white like that.
Yes, for sure. It's the amygdala. The amygdala is the main center of the brain that is like the fight, flight, freeze. Basically, that's like our survival instincts, is the amygdala. And that's the amygdala, basically. Like, the amygdala is sort of hyper reacting like that to because that's what happens with borderline. Like, when they split like that, and they're like, oh my god, this person's terrible now, I have to get away, and then they discard them. It's literally like, at least for people with borderline, it's really about their safety. They feel like they're unsafe then with that person. For narcissism, they discard more because this person is not feeding me narcissistic supply anymore. I gotta get my new fix for narcissistic supply. So though, I mean, the narcissist does really, I mean, their narcissistic supply is like when they don't get it, it feels like death. So I mean, that's what the narcissistic supply is, what feeds their
I don't feel bad for narcissists at all.
Sorry.
my amount of empathy is like, I only have a certain amount, and I don't feel bad for people with narcissism. I actually can feel bad for people with antisocial personality disorder, even though they don't feel bad for me. But but yeah, I don't know. The stuff that I've read just seems kind of problematic.
Yeah, I mean, it is, but it is important to remember that, like, people with narcissistic personality disorder do still suffer, though. They really do. They won't show it, of course, and they'll tell you, like, no, I'm fine. I love my life. My life is great. It's the best. It's the best life. But I mean, they do still suffer, and it's not easy. They really don't do well with keeping friends. But yeah, I mean, and they still can, like, they still can feel empathy, and they can still feel remorse. Even people with antisocial personality disorder can still feel empathy and remorse. It's just that, like, it's much more stunted in these disorders. It's a lot harder for them. Like, they have to actually, like, consciously employ, like, empathy and remorse, sort of. It's because they just kind of have it, like, it's turned off, essentially, most of the time for them. And again, that's like a survival mechanism, sort of, because they're very agentic, meaning like they're hyper individualistic, and that's sort of how they go through life, as very much like just me, cause. And here's the other part, is that they assume everyone else is just like them. They assume that everyone else is equally as selfishly motivated and out for themselves.
So that's probably how they morally justify it to themselves.
Yes, yeah. Because they're like, well, everyone else is like this, so I have to be like this. This is how I'm going to survive in life. This is how I'm going to survive in the world. I have to be like this.
Is this why these disorders often come out of abuse, right? Like, that's what I've heard.
What did you say? Sorry, you cut out a little bit.
Oh, is this why these disorders often come out of childhood abuse?
Yeah. Yep.
Because that's like their experience as a child, right? That, like, it's a harsh world, and you've got to get, and you develop like these different coping mechanisms on how to to survive, right? So someone, say like with borderline, their coping mechanism's not going to be like malicious particularly or something, but you know, someone with narcissist personality disorder, it could be malicious.
It can be,
as a consequence.
yeah. It can be, especially if they're in a vindictive bend. Yeah.
I wonder, like, how do we balance protecting ourselves from people, like, you know, with these issues versus also participating in the stigma, right?
Yeah, it's tough.
Because it's such a hard balance.
Yeah. It is, I know. Because it can certainly be scary. But it's also like, you don't, yeah, it's hard because like you also don't want to like be ableist and kind of just like assume that like, well, if this person has a cluster B personality disorder, that means they're probably going to like split on me and discard me at some point. Because I mean, sure, yeah, that's a possibility, but like also plenty of people with cluster B personality disorders, they might not, it might not happen, you know.
Yeah, especially there's some that are
they might be in
treatable.
therapy, like they might have been working on this and stuff, and so they're not really like splitting as extremely anymore. And yeah.
So would you say like which personality disorders? So we said that like the schizoid ones are the most treatable. BPD is also treatable, right?
Yeah, that's the thing I did want to mention, that BPD is like, so BPD is the one that actually responds the best to treatment because we actually
that's interesting.
found like a really effective treatment for it. So it's like, I believe it's like
DBT or something.
Yeah, dialectical behavioral therapy is like the godsend for like BPD, basically. Yeah.
Could you tell me what that is?
Okay, so dialectical behavioral therapy is similar to, do you know about cognitive behavioral therapy?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah. And cognitive behavioral therapy is basically like, the belief is that, okay, thoughts lead to emotions, which lead to actions. So in order to help a person change, we got to target their thinking. And that'll lead to behavioral change, kind of. That's like, so like DBT is that plus, but it's like, it's basically like, it's CBT, but with like the added Buddhism element essentially.
Buddhism?
So it's like, yeah, the woman who developed DBT, she basically essentially added like tons of Buddhist elements to it. So like acceptance.
That's crazy.
Like,
that's so fascinating.
Yeah, and it turns out it's even more effective than CBT, like our regular like cognitive behavioral therapy. Yeah, and the main part of DBT is acceptance. People need to learn to accept their feelings, accept their thoughts, not push them away like, oh no, that's a bad feeling, I can't feel that way, oh no, it's bad. That's not good. So DBT helps to it helps you sit with those uncomfortable emotions. That's part, and like it incorporated mindfulness and stuff, mindfulness meditation, things like that. So yeah, it helps you to basically accept like what you're feeling. And that's what I practice. I practice that because it's kind of crucial for being a therapist, learning to accept your feelings and not being like ashamed of them and stuff, and like sitting with them and experiencing the discomfort and sitting and experiencing emotional pain, like sitting with that pain instead of running away to play video games and escape, which is my unhealthy coping mechanism.
Yeah, I was gonna be like, are you calling at me?
And not feel things.
That's such like a tough, I don't know. It's such a tough thing. Like, I know cognitive behavioral therapy was huge for me with my social anxiety.
It's very effective for social anxiety. Yeah.
Yeah, really good. I had a therapist that would literally make I shouldn't say she made me, right? But she would encourage me to go on the subway every day and just like take the train regularly.
Yeah, that's
Just as a
exposure
way
therapy.
just like as a way to, that's why I always tell people, and correct me if I'm wrong, that like CBT is just like a fancy way of saying like facing your fears in a responsible way.
Yeah.
It's like that very
Um,
old idea of that.
yeah, it's exposure therapy basically. And yeah, that is what exposure therapy is. It basically is facing your fears. Because the brain will habituate itself um
Hmm.
over time. That's literally what my streaming was. It was literally like me forcing myself to do the thing that I didn't want to do and was scared and was super uncomfortable.
Hmm.
But yeah, CBT is very much like put yourself in those situations where you feel uncomfortable and super anxious, and then just wait until it goes down, because it does go down. It's true. Like the anxiety will slowly go down. It gets worse before it gets better.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Is
or like
is there a way that someone, like, and I don't know if this is irresponsible to say, right? Chris, so just correct me if it is. Is there a way that someone can kind of give CBT to themselves, right? If they're not in a situation where they can afford therapy?
so they can't really give themselves CBT, but they can certainly do some techniques. Like there's therapy techniques that people can do themselves. Things like PMR, progressive muscle relaxation. And these are things you can find on Google too. Like you can literally find like even clinical notes and like manuals and stuff online. Like there's sources that
Hmm.
kind of almost like teach how to do these. Also, mindfulness meditation is a therapeutic technique that's really helpful for anxiety and
Yeah.
lots of problems, basically. um, there's
No,
radical
meditation
acceptance
has helped me a
techniques.
lot. A lot.
Meditation's really good. Especially meditation is good for people who tend to have avoidance coping mechanisms, who want to like
Mm.
sort of who tend to like try and avoid like feeling things and like experiencing painful things and stuff. Yeah. There's also like what else? There's like other de-stressing techniques that you can learn online. So like yeah, if someone doesn't have access to therapy, I mean, so I probably have a slightly problematic, not super leftist take, but I kind of tend to think that like when people say they can't get therapy, it's kind of an excuse. I don't know. Um,
You think
so
that, like, yeah, that they're,
not every time. I mean, obviously it's nuanced, but usually in a lot of cases, I do tend to think that it's an excuse, because I think that like there's always some, because here's the thing, like therapists are always willing to work with clients and like make it affordable for them, and like all you kind of just have to like call around and like see, and I kind of
it's
feel
so
like
scary to do that though, because I don't want to feel like an asshole, like devaluing someone's work,
I
when they
know what
put,
you mean. I
and be
know.
like, hey, like, I know you normally charge 150, but can you just
How
like
about give me a
can you charge me
discount?
like $10?
Yeah, I know. It's usually just like asking the therapist if they like what they do basically for clients who maybe not aren't able to afford or something. But yeah,
Yeah.
I know what you mean, because I
And
would feel similarly. It would cause me a fuck ton of anxiety.
yeah, and then there's also the problem of like, there's, for me, is I feel like I've seen so many therapists, and like
Yeah.
9 out of 10 of them just did not work for me.
Really? That's
And
interesting.
yeah, like, so like I think like a lot of people have this experience that like therapy is so often dependent on you having like a really good connection with that person. Um, and maybe it shouldn't be that way, but I guess it's always felt like that for me. So I know
Mhm.
that people who have had bad experiences with therapy, it makes them just completely give up on it because
Yeah,
they just
no.
happen to not connect with, those people. And
Yeah,
it's an
no.
expensive thing to be constantly testing, right? Like, am I going to connect with this person? Am I going to connect with that person? Because of course they don't, like, I never see a therapist saying like, okay, well, acting like lawyers, be like, okay, we'll only accept payment if we fix your problem. Um,
Yeah, I
right.
know. I mean, the thing is that technically, really, you're kind of supposed to like stick with your. It's also really super super important to stick with one therapist, um, because that's how you can develop a close therapeutic relationship. Because it does take
Hmm.
time. It takes a lot of time, to be honest. And so I always encourage people to really be patient, unless they like I mean, unless your therapist is really shitty or something, I guess, like, because over time, like, honestly, that relationship will develop. I mean, so yeah, I don't know. I usually encourage people to give it time. Um, but
Yeah,
I
because
guess,
it takes time because you need to develop that connection with someone.
sorry.
But yeah, because you need to be able to develop that connection with someone.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's not really a quick thing. It certainly can take time, especially for people that are already like a bit have had bad experiences or like a little distrustful or like not really easily able to like open up or something. Yeah.
So, would you say that if you don't connect with a therapist, you should just try to stick it out with them rather than trying to find another one?
I guess it depends, to be honest. Like, it depends on how much time has gone by. I think that's like a kind of a crucial thing. Like, if it's been like a year and you still don't feel like you're connected with your therapist, maybe think about maybe think about trying a new one. Yeah.
Because I feel
Um
like I know it right away, like if I connect with someone.
yeah.
Especially for me, one of the most important things for me being to be able to connect to a therapist is that like they understand the world I live in. Um,
Okay.
and that can be a real challenge for me, depending on what world I'm living. Like for my teenage years, I was living in an Orthodox Jewish world, so it was very hard to be talking to
Okay.
people that were not either familiar with Orthodox Jewish life or anything like that, because like they just had like a totally different set. But at the same time, if I was talking to someone that was an Orthodox Jewish person, there also might be like bias there and all this
Yeah.
stuff too. So that was extra tough. Or even now with like the world I'm operating in is like streaming and
Yeah.
internet culture and gaming and all this stuff. And if someone doesn't understand that world, it's like really, I feel like I end up just spending the whole therapy session just trying to like explain things, and it feels
Yeah,
really inefficient.
for sure. Yeah, like I do understand that. That's a reason why a lot of people love Dr. K.
Oh
um,
yeah.
um yeah, for sure. That does make sense to some extent. Yeah. I think like I think that it's good to um probably like keep in mind that even if a therapist doesn't like exactly know about streaming and stuff, like um if they're usually like most like that are like younger-ish, like
Mm,
younger than like 50 and stuff, like they probably pretty much understand like how the internet works and social media, and
yeah.
I would think. And I think that like that could be sort of good enough, kind of, because I think here's the thing, like because and I've seen that like you're not alone in feeling that way, but I think that it can restrict like um it can like almost restrict like a person from finding like a good therapist if it's like, but they need to know about this and this and this kind of thing and
Mm,
like really understand. Because the thing is that like um therapists can genuinely like understand, that's kind of like what they're supposed to
yeah, that's
do.
their job, right? Is
Yeah,
empathy,
that is
right?
their job. Yeah. To really like put themselves like to reflect like your feelings and understand like your perspective and stuff. Yeah. And
The I wanted to kind of get back into the personality disorders.
yeah, sure.
Um, so we went through. So we were just introducing, I guess. So we talked about histrionic. Is that how you
Oh
pronounce
yeah.
it?
Yeah, his
So what are the other ones?
yeah, okay. So, I think I mentioned like that all the cluster B ones, and the other thing I didn't get to say about histrionic that's um really interesting about it is that like um they will be like a key part of histrionic is that they'll like be inappropriately sexual with like almost
Oh,
everyone. Yeah. Yeah. So like there's the whole like immediately being like feeling like super close to someone, like, oh man, we're like best friends now. And also being inappropriately sexual with them. So like
so do you think
one
like
of
Harvey Weinstein like might have
sorry?
something like a Harvey Weinstein level, or do you mean like just throwing yourself at people? Like,
Yeah, kind of throwing
okay.
yourself at people. Yeah, being flirty at like very like they're sort of known for being like very inappropriately like flirtatious, and like one of the things that this also can be like, it's also one of the reasons probably why more women get diagnosed with histrionic
Mhm.
um is like a lot. I've read so many case studies where like the women diagnosed as histrionic, um part of what was used to diagnose them was because they wore very provocative clothing and
I see.
dressed very, yeah. So like, because again, it is part of histrionic, it's part of like their thing, like um it's like a lack of boundaries basically. And so yeah, like they'll dress like like very like they're going out clubbing, but to like their therapy appointment, where it's
Mhm.
clearly inappropriate to like, yeah.
But
um
couldn't like a feminist say like, oh, like that's sexist, right? Like a woman can just wear whatever she wants.
yeah, I know. So it's kind of like an uncomfortable area because it's like, well, it could also be an indicator of like being like, but it's again, it's like inappropriate, and it's like beyond what's considered socially normative. So yeah, I mean, wearing short shorts is one thing, but like wearing really short booty shorts and maybe like a really low cut top and like I don't and like almost like wearing no clothes practically a thing maybe to your
Mm.
therapy appointment.
And
Well,
it's always
maybe that's
probably
like,
relative to whatever is considered normal in that society. So like I don't
yeah,
know,
yeah, that
so in like the Orthodox Jewish world, it could probably the equivalent of that could be like, I don't know, um, show like we're just wearing normal shorts or something.
maybe, yeah. I don't really know anything about Orthodox Jewish culture.
How dare you not
Um,
know everything about everything, Anna? Shame on you.
I think I have like some understanding, but just very surface level. But yeah, so like obviously if you're trying to identify like like men with histrionic personality disorder, like that you see like the issue there then with like the sexism kind of with
Well,
like
yeah,
that
because like
whole,
sexual
yeah.
aggression in men is kind of like celebrated, right? Um,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
so wouldn't it'd probably be really rare unless like someone gets I don't know, accused of like sexual assault or something.
Yeah, yeah, or like sexual harassment or something. Yeah. Um but yeah, basically like there's also like just remembering case studies that I've read of like people who are diagnosed with histrionic personality disorder. They also like one example was like a woman who slept with like her friend's dad, and it kind of like destroyed like the relationship because obviously,
Mm.
and so and like things like that, like also just being like very quick to like have sex with someone also. But that's also something we see with borderline, is the high level of promiscuity.
Yeah,
um
can we talk about borderline?
yeah, sure. Yeah. People with
So
borderline personality disorder are twice as likely to contract like HIV because of that
really,
high promiscuity that they have. Yeah. And the
it's
fact
interesting.
it tends to be
Like
impulsive.
here we have these things called like free sexual health clinics. You guys probably
Oh,
don't have that
really?
in the United States. Yeah. So,
Huh.
but so you could just show up to the clinic and they'll ask you a bunch of questions and then they're going to test you based on like your risk level. So
Oh,
for example, I remember like I wanted to get tested for HIV because I have hypochondria. So
yeah.
I just want to be tested on for everything. And they're like, no,
Yeah.
we can't test you on everything. And I was like, why not? And they're like, well, you're not in the risk group.
Yeah.
But but anyways, yeah. So if I said if I'd been someone with BPD and I'd said, oh, I have BPD, would that have been considered something
It
that
might.
would give me the test?
It's possible, yeah. It's
That's
possible.
interesting. So what
Yeah.
makes them more likely to be in that risk group?
So basically, it's a documented thing that people with BPD, there's a tendency to basically, well, like I said, have higher levels of promiscuity, sexual promiscuity. So yeah, it's like a combination of like the impulsivity, because impulsiveness and like doing risky things is a part of BPD, of course. Very impulsive, especially when faced with abandonment. You know, the primary core of BPD is the intense fear of abandonment. And I
Yeah.
mean, it is intense. Like, death is preferable to abandonment to someone with borderline.
Because I think everyone's a little afraid of abandonment, right? Like that's normal. Like,
yeah, it is normal. Nobody likes abandonment. Nobody likes rejection. Like,
yeah.
don't think that like, oh no, I'm gonna have BPD because I don't like abandonment. No, that's normal.
It's
like,
way more intense than that.
yeah, I mean, I'm talking like they will like they're willing to like threaten suicide just to avoid abandonment or something.
And that's not them being manipulative. Like they literally feel
they
like that.
genuinely become suicididal.
And that's the problem. Like when I've heard people with BPD like say that, that's a really common thing in my experience, right? It's easy for me. Like my instinct is like, that's manipulative, that's fucked up, right? That's a form of emotional abuse. And then I pull back and they end up getting abandoned by consequence. Right, because of that behavior.
Yeah. That's the sad thing about BPD, is that actually the behaviors that they do to try and avoid abandonment actually end up sabotaging. It actually ends
they
up
like create their worst fear.
Yeah. So it's a really, really like, it's like, I always think of it as like a tragic disorder, because it's like they literally feel like they're in the driver's seat all their life. Like, right. They feel like they just no control, and they feel like they're just watching like their life.
They're not in the driver's seat.
Yeah, they don't feel like they're in control. They feel like their BPD is because the BPD is in control. It really is. And it's always important to like, when working like borderline clients, it's important to sort of talk about like the borderline is like separate from them. It also helps with like overcoming it, because I mean, it is like you can literally leave behind the disorder. Like, even though, yes, it's like there's aspects of it that are part of like the person's personality or whatever, they can still leave that disorder behind them, and they can no longer be borderline, essentially. And I always like to remind people of that, like, yeah, like
they could get treated, right?
It's not just yeah, it's not something you are like doomed to live with, sort of.
I think the tough thing though is that borderline has such a stigma associated with it that very few people want to they want to accept that diagnosis. Like that's really common, right? So then if you don't accept it, then you can't actually fix the problem, and then you're going to end up in that cycle all the time.
Yeah. And also, like, another thing with cluster B personality disorder, well, actually it's all personality disorders, kind of. They do like to shop for therapists. Like, they don't like to like stick with one therapist. But also that's kind of a function of the idealized devalue discard cycle that they're kind of doing with their therapist, sort of. But yeah, particularly like, especially with, oh my God, I think narcissism might be the worst with this one. They like usually come to the conclusion that their therapist is a fucking idiot, is like, wow, they're just not good enough for me. They're a fucking idiot. Some narcissists have literally said like, my therapist isn't pretty enough, so fuck her. I'm gonna go find another one. Like, it's actually ridiculous.
That sounds like someone with narcissistic personality disorder. That totally does.
Yeah, Dr. Eleanor Greenberg tells a story of her one narcissism client said like, well, your breasts are like not even that big, and usually I don't see therapists with such small boobs.
Oh my god. Wow, like, and I think, like, that's because that's why a lot of therapists refuse to treat people with narcissist personality disorder, right?
Yeah. Also because they're just not equipped to do it. It kind of takes like a specialist sort of to deal with like those disorders usually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I heard that there's just a big problem that they're going to try to manipulate the therapist. But is that common with people with BPD, or is it not as common?
So people with borderline don't intentionally manipulate. They almost never are intentionally manipulating anyone. They almost like can't, because they're just too impulsive sort of, and very emotionally reactive.
So in a way, does that mean that they're actually incredibly genuine?
Yeah, actually, that's the weird thing. Here's the weird thing about BPD is that they're actually super vulnerable to being manipulated. They're actually incredibly easy to manipulate, essentially.
So it's more likely they're going to be a victim of abuse than an abuser themselves?
It's actually both. It's both. There's a higher likelihood to be abusive and also victimized.
It's so sad. That's like...
It is, yeah. And also, you know, what's even worse is that there's this weird thing that's like, it's actually something that's been observed, like, that narcissists are attracted to people with borderline, and they often like will get in relationships.
Oh, that's awful.
Yeah, it's really bad.
That makes me feel gross.
Like, yeah, it is, because the person with NPD is like able to be like emotionally distanced and like cold and sort of like, and so like the person with borderline ends up suffering a lot in the relationship with the narcissist, and it's just it's a mess.
It's almost really like it's almost like the person with narcissism, NPD, can actually use that cycle of BPD against them, right? Especially if they're smart. As a way to control them.
Yep. Yeah, and that's what ends up happening, and it's really sad.
Oh, that is awful.
Yeah.
One of my viewers mentioned saying, oh, thank you for that sub, Niv, by the way. Sorry, guys, I'm not responding to the feed, the intro. When I'm in intense conversations like that, it feels weird to interrupt it with, like, Twitch stuff all the time. Normally I do it, though. But I am Louie said, nah, BPD is borderline because they live on the border of sanity, in my opinion. I've been diagnosed with it, and my reality is either super disconnected in a positive or negative way. I always see myself as evil for some reason, or I try my best to be good. Honestly, I thought I was a psychopath for years 7 to 20.
Wow. Yeah, I'm sorry that you have to deal with that. It's rough, but yeah. I mean, I like the way they described that as like living on the border of like sanity, sort of. Yeah, I mean, that's generally how people with borderline describe themselves. Yeah, it's rough, and it definitely doesn't mean a person is evil at all. Obviously, like it's a disorder, and it's something that is very difficult. Like, nobody would choose to have BPD, you know, like nobody would choose to have it. Nobody chooses this, you know, but same with NPD too. Nobody chooses to have that either. And so it really sucks having to just live with it. And also a big problem is like watching all the relationships and stuff, that like watching all the bridges that get burnt essentially from like the behavior, like the acting out and sabotaging and stuff.
Yeah, and that's just so tough for them to be going through. Like, what do you think are the biggest misconceptions about BPD? Because it's being in movies, right? Like, wasn't Fatal Attraction woman, she had BPD?
Yeah, I think that's like, honestly, Hollywood's like the worst culprit for stigmatizing BPD, because it's like, okay, first of all, people with BPD are not likely to like become like dangerous stalkers or like murderers or something. Like, no, that's not, no. The majority of people with BPD are like pretty harmless, honestly, like physically. Yeah, I mean, there's of course like the rapid like the mood changes and stuff with BPD, of course, which is kind of a function of that the splitting, kind of, because like when the splitting of course happens, like it can be very rapid.
Yeah.
And of course, like they could sort of go from like being really nice and loving and stuff to then like, oh fuck you, I hate you. You know.
Yeah, but how
So,
do we
like,
like how does someone, if you want to be in a relationship, whether it's romantic, sexual, a platonic, like familial, right? If you're trying to maintain a relationship with someone who has BPD, how do you keep that relationship in a healthy zone, right? And not
yeah.
also damaging you mentally.
Yeah. Basically, like I would say like the very best thing would be to like get therapy with the person. Like couples therapy is really helpful for BPD, because then the person kind of can learn like what things trigger their borderline partner. And it's usually like the same, it's pretty much the same. Like people with borderline are like generally triggered by the same shit, like perceived rejection, or real or perceived rejection, real or perceived abandonment. And they can learn like how to avoid triggering their partner and stuff. And
But it's so hard because one of those triggers, right, the fear of
yeah,
abandonment, is often a necessary boundary, like that reflects from the other person's perspective in a necessary boundary for them to be healthy, right? Is from saying something like, "Hey, like I would like to take a break for a week," or
oh
like I wish you wouldn't. I don't know, like I don't want you to just show up to this movie theater when I'm here, like something like that.
yeah,
Like there are so many things, like it's easy to just say let's avoid the triggers, but what happens when those triggers are things that are necessary for someone to be living a healthy
right.
life?
Yeah, I mean, well, that's something that you can't really avoid, of course. Because yeah, sometimes like obviously in all relationships, like yeah, you're gonna need to maybe take a break from like a conversation or something, or like, hey, let's take a break from talking for like 24 hours or whatever to like calm down or something.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, you can't really control how the person with BPD might react to it, unfortunately. All you can really do is like just kind of like
Are
set
there
that
things you can
boundary.
say?
And sorry.
Are there things that you can say that will
Yeah,
make it feel
they're
better?
definitely, yeah, you can definitely like reassure them like, hey, just, you know, I'm not like abandoning you. Like this isn't uh, I'm promise like we're going to talk about this. Like I'm going to be back. Like I just need a break. Like I'm not abandoning you. Like reassuring can really help, since they're like terrified
Mm-hmm.
of being abandoned. So yeah, reassuring helps for sure. To clarify that like, hey, by the way, this isn't abandonment. Like we're gonna talk. I just need a little break, kind of thing. Yeah.
What about like threats of suicide, right? Because this is also like a really common thing. And I mean,
Yeah.
people with BPD do have a very high suicide rate in general.
They
So
have
they're
the
not
highest.
necessarily just threats, right?
They have the highest out of all mental illnesses. Yeah, it's the
Wow.
highest suicide rate. Yeah.
Yeah,
So it's
so
like it's not just threats. It's important to take it seriously. Um, because
but
yeah,
that's a lot to put on someone, right? Especially someone that
It's a
like
lot. It's stressful. Yeah.
yeah, I think about like me that like my knowledge about this shit, I probably know more than most people and I still know like zero, right?
Yeah.
Like my knowledge comes from Wikipedia. So I
Yeah.
feel like sometimes if I'm talking to someone that has those issues, it's like I am not equipped to be dealing with this problem.
Yeah. Some
Thank you for
people
that
are not.
sublead, by the way.
Some people are not equipped to really be dealing with like a friend or partner that has BPD, because like maybe they have like a lot of issues of their own or something. They have too many
Mm-hmm.
things going on, like, and yeah, I mean, that happens. I mean, really a person with BPD really does need to be in therapy. Um that's like really really important. Um yeah.
Yeah, I wonder if it would be helpful for someone who has BPD to write a list, and correct me if I'm wrong, right? Again, I'm zero credentials. It's just a theory.
Yeah, right.
But to write a theory, write a theory, write a bunch of ideas down, of things that the people around them can say when they want to create a boundary, right?
Yeah.
And but also keep them as calm as possible.
Yeah. That's really it's really helpful. If they can basically do that, like making their boundaries like really clear and stuff, like things that they know definitely will trigger them, or like really upset them. That actually is very helpful to do, for sure. It helps like their friends and like their partner and stuff to at least like be aware of it, because a big problem is, of course, when like, which is something that really is very frequent thing, and I've experienced this myself, where it's like you don't realize that something you say just like triggers them then, and then they're like really upset, and it's like, oh fuck, I didn't know that would like trigger them off. Oh no, like, that's like a really big problem that a lot of people experience, just like not realizing that, like, oh my god, saying that triggered them really badly and stuff. But it's kind of hard with borderline because almost anything, it seems like sometimes almost anything can trigger them, like disagreeing with something, can
not responding to them really quickly.
Sorry?
Not responding to them really quickly is a trigger that I've noticed.
That can be one. Yeah, that can be one for sure. Yeah. Also, like, if you have like an opinion that they find to be like problematic in some way, maybe like it's something that the person is really bothered by, or a really big one is feeling judged. Because for people with borderline, well, it's kind of like, honestly, it's kind of a lot of the personality disorders though, but particularly people with like cluster B personality disorders are extremely sensitive to judgment and feeling judged and being judged, and like they very easily can feel judged, and even just from like another person expressing like an opinion, sort of, and so that in itself can be a trigger. But because judgment is seen as rejection, it's a form of rejection. So they can have
problem, because like so many things can be seen as rejection, right? And that's probably why it affects their relationship so much.
Yeah, it's why, because it's almost impossible to avoid, because everybody has different morals and values and opinions. Well, not so much morals, but like values, sort of.
Yeah.
And so it's like, if you tend to see like someone disagreeing with like one of your, like a value of yours as like an attack, a personal attack, which is often, that's kind of a thing with borderline, that they tend to see like, someone's like opinion as like a personal attack. That's going to be extremely difficult to get along with anyone in life, like, because everybody has different opinions. And like,
is there a way that I could potentially be engaging in some kind of emotional abuse if when I'm talking to someone with, say, with BPD, and I mention that they have BPD, or I say that this is like an example of a BPD behavior, so I feel like, you should go to therapy for this, or something like that? Is that like really irresponsible to say?
No,
because people will say that's like, you're like, you're like diagnosing people, or
as long as you're not like saying to someone like, well, I think you have BPD or something. No, but like expressing your concerns with like problematic behavior is like a good thing. It's a healthy thing. You're supposed to do that. And encouraging someone to go to therapy is never like abusive. What is abusive is discouraging therapy.
But what if someone says it like, dude, you're fucking crazy, you need therapy? Like,
well, yeah,
because they could say it like that, right?
Yeah, calling anyone crazy is like, that's abusive. Yeah, because it's like,
I have such a problem with that. Like, I told you this before. Like, I use crazy all the time, and I just don't know what other word to use. to describe like certain behavior. And I know it's wrong, but I just don't like, I don't have like another solution.
Yeah, I know. It's like it can be hard to change, like, if, especially a word that you've like always used for a long time and stuff. Yeah.
What are other like, are there any other terms that you could think of that are useful to use in place of crazy?
Unhealthy? I tend to use unhealthy.
Unhealthy is actually good.
Yeah, like unhealthy, or trying to think of like non.
Because I was thinking, I was like, whack, nuts, out there, like all terms that are basically just as bad. So
yeah, I mean, nuts is kind of like the same, sort of the same. It's, and like I was thinking like, wait, unstable. Oh no, that sounds even, no, that's no.
yeah, like so many of those terms are just really,
offending.
yeah, are just like really bad.
Yeah, I don't know. I think unhealthy is like, I don't think there's too much judgment behind unhealthy, but then again, it's
That
hard
still
to say.
feels kind of judgy though. Like
Sorry?
it feels like that does still feel kind of judgy. Like it feels like
guess
there's
it
no
does.
term that's not going to come off.
No, I
Like,
know,
yeah.
honestly. Yeah, and that's kind of the problem. I mean, since people with borderline are very hypersensitive, so like it's tough because it's almost like, if sometimes it can feel like there's like, it's like a lose-lose situation almost, but
Yeah. So you're trying to, like, basically you're not going to find moral purity in one term, right? You're just going to find the least bad, like the
Yeah.
least harmful.
yeah, the least, like trying to find like the least triggering, I guess, sort of, or like the least judgmental sounding.
Mhm.
Yeah. And I mean, it
I
can be
read
tough, like,
online that one of the good terms to use would be like, it's unwise or unstrategic to be doing this behavior.
yeah, that
Because
could work
that like
too.
doesn't have like a judgmental attitude with it.
I feel like unwise could still sound kind of judgmental. I don't
Yeah,
know.
that's true.
I don't know. I mean, I guess I feel it could still kind of come across maybe as condescending. I don't know.
Yeah, that's the problem. It's like I feel like when I do try to be more responsible with my language, then it just comes off condescending. So like
Yeah, same.
I like can't win.
Yeah, same. That's how I feel too.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
really tough.
I think like it can sort of help to just, I don't know. I mean, I try and reassure like, hey, I'm not trying to like judge you or anything. It's just, I just am like, I just noticed this thing and I'm just kind of worried, like kind of bothers me a little or something like that. I'll try and say.
One of my
Like
viewers suggested counterproductive. That seems like a good one.
Oh, counterproductive. That
Yeah.
is a good one. Yeah.
My only issue with that is that like what happens if the person's doing something that's very emotionally abusive, right? Like sometimes one of the problems when you're being a victim of abuse is you're trying to call out the abuse to your abuser, right?
Yeah.
The way it's very common for them to dismiss it and to say like, oh, like you're just being emotional, you're just being like oversensitive, etc., right? So I find that I often have like this need to justify it, right? To say like, no, like this is considered a toxic behavior, like
That's exactly you're
like,
literally just like me.
yeah, like
you're
and
just
you're
like
like
me.
yeah, like I want to be able to be like, no, like this is, and that's where I'll accidentally use the word crazy, right? Which is where I'll deviate from you probably, where like I'll be like, no, like this behavior is considered nuts, like no one will accept this behavior. It's considered really bad.
For me, I tend to just link a Psych article and be like, no, look, this is considered abusive. Look.
Yeah, but I wonder like if you end up just doing like if when you're responding to abuse, you can be abusive yourself, right? Like by like responding, because that can be misused. I could totally imagine tons of situations
Yeah, for sure.
where that's misused, especially with like gaslighting and stuff.
Yeah. I mean, generally, like I said, yeah, I mean, the thing is that like sometimes it does happen where it's like, yeah, if you're being like emotionally abused or something, and you react like with anger or something, and or like you don't react in like the best way. it's kind of like a normal thing though, to be honest. Like most people don't react very well to like experiencing emotional abuse, you know?
Well, yeah, like what if you respond, like what if, because I could totally imagine a situation like this happening where someone's, especially once you start being educated about emotional abuse and these personality disorders, where someone's like, well, you have this personality disorder and you're engaging in this abuse and this abuse, and here's this article. And then the person's like, well, actually, you by doing that is engaging in this abuse and this abuse. So abuse inception, you're actually the abuser. Like, how do you solve this? Like, how do you solve this problem?
Well, it's not abusive to like point out abusive behavior, right? Like this
But
is
what if you're
something.
doing it in like a gaslighting way? Right?
So
Like,
gaslighting is like intentionally distorting like reality. So I mean, as long as you're not actually like, as long as you're like you're right about it, essentially. Like if the person's
yeah.
actually engaging is like in a like an abusive behavior and you're just pointing it out, like generally from what I've learned, like that's okay to do. Cause like I've asked like psychologists and stuff, and like I've always gotten the answer that like, no, it's not abusive to like point out, hey, look, this behavior is really harmful and stuff. And like, yeah, like my one psych professor would literally like give his daughter like psych articles sometimes for, I forget, if like she, yeah, if she would like, if they would like have a fight or something, and he would just like link her like a psych article and just be like, hey, by the way, just read this. Like, yeah, it's not like there's nothing wrong with that. You could do that. Definitely refrain from like calling a person crazy though, because that actually is something that's like considered to be abusive behavior. Yeah, like as long, if the person's actually being abusive, the problem is that when a person isn't actually doing a behavior that's considered abusive and you call them abusive, that would be a form of gaslighting. Yes. But if they're actually doing something that's abusive, then yeah, I mean, though it's just,
But
it's
that's the
not like the
problem. Like,
best way
there's
to
so
do it.
much, like, a lot of, like, abusive tactics and behaviors are so normalized in the media and stuff that
Yeah,
it's,
no,
I feel like,
no.
I feel like almost everyone engages in some of this stuff,
Yeah,
even by
to some
accident.
extent, yeah. Yeah, by
Um,
accident. Yep.
Crazy Shot had a question for you. I've had roommates who are very, very unwell and use their mental illness to abuse me relentlessly. What do people who live with abusive people with clear signs of mental unwellness call out that behavior without being harmful themselves?
Yeah. That's tough when people kind of use their mental illness almost like as an excuse, kind of, because it's like it's not like
Yeah, and it feels like that's more common lately, especially now with
yeah,
mental illness now starting to be a little less stigmatized and people are becoming more knowledgeable about. Like, just by consequence, people are going to start using that to excuse behaviors.
yeah. I mean, if they use it as a way to like explain their behavior, like sure, I can understand that. Like I can understand wanting to explain, but also it becomes an excuse when they're not doing anything to change the behavior. That's when it becomes an excuse. Like sure, give an explanation, you know, and also be
It's a
working
good line.
to change that behavior. Not just like doing nothing about it, sort of, because that's when it becomes like an excuse, you know.
Yeah.
I guess like, you know, the way to like, I guess, see, here's the thing that's calling out, and this is something I'm not good at myself because I tend to like being direct and wanting to call out abuse behavior, but like
Yeah.
it doesn't work. It doesn't actually work. So just calling out back like poor behavior, it doesn't work. Basically, the way to do it is but it's hard to do it in the moment when you're really upset and being harmed, but the way to do it is actually to sort of talk about your feelings. You want to frame it in a way that's talking about your feelings. So like addressing your roommates, like saying like, hey, this really hurts me when you do this, or like I'm really upset because you said this, and like I'm wondering if there's a way that I don't know what like we could talk about this, or we can avoid this happening in the future,
Yeah.
or something like that. Sort of use your feelings. Using your
But like
feelings is like the best,
people never
especially.
respect that. People never respect feelings. Like, let's be
I
honest.
know, I
Right?
know.
Like the only times I feel like people actually start to take something seriously is when they're like is when I say like a line that I use, and you can tell me if this is barely bad or not. I won't be offended. Is like, that's not cool. Like, I don't know, for some reason that always feels like the way to just like put my foot down and say that like a behavior is like really unhealthy, it's toxic, and I'm not okay with it.
Yeah, that's totally acceptable. Yeah.
'Cause- so that's fine. Okay.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I'm the same way. That's why I tend to intellectualize, which is why I'm like, I love to link psych articles and stuff, because I tend to intellectualize, and I tend to be so used to people like being dismissive of feelings. Yeah, and I almost like expect that. So then I'm like, well, they're not going to listen to my feelings. So, well, maybe they'll listen if like, maybe they'll take me seriously if I actually like show them that there's evidence of this or something. Maybe they'll believe me then.
Yeah.
So like, yeah, it sucks. But yeah, using feelings is really the best way to go about it, because it that's the way that doesn't put people on the defensive. Yeah.
Crazy Shot said, my main concern is that people who weaponize their trauma or mental illness are often truly scummy people. I called out my last roommate, and her response was, this is the best I can be, I can't change. I don't know what to do with people that are that far gone.
Yeah, I mean, when people say like, oh, I can't change, yeah, that sucks, because like, no, you can change, you just don't want to.
Yeah, and there's still like some personal responsibility there. I dated this guy once when I was much younger. He was way older than me. Probably was a bad idea. And I dated this guy who had really intense, or he told me he had really intense anxiety disorders, right? And he also said that he had PTSD from his father dying.
Okay.
So, anyway, so one of the things that would happen is he would, whenever I wanted to do anything, like go out with friends, go to a party, wear an outfit, something like that, he would say that gave him anxiety, right? And like he would be really stressed at the idea of me being at that party, or really stressed at the idea of me being friends with that male colleague, right? And it would cause him anxiety attacks, and I wasn't like accommodating him. And he would use this all this like mental health language.
Can you call it like a boundary? Like it violates my boundary when you hang out with a male friend. Do that.
If he knew that term, he probably would have used that, right? Yeah. But yeah, like, so it was always like that, yeah, that's my and that's the problem with a lot of this like mental health language, is how often it can be misused. What ended up happening is I would actually, like, within like a week, I was like, there are too many red flags here, and I ended up dating him for 2 entire months, which I'm telling you felt like the longest time in the world with him. And I did him for 2 months because like literally every day I would be trying to break up with him, and every day there would be an excuse on why I couldn't end things with him that day. Like he would say, oh, like this is like the anniversary of this person's death, like you would, and then like guilt me and say like, how dare you do this to me, like on this day, and you're gonna leave me like this, like you're just like my dad, or like things like that.
Oh jeez.
Yeah, and I wonder, like, when I tell people that story, it seems like it's really common, where that kind of mental health language and gets used. And when you're trying to be someone that doesn't participate in like stigmas and be responsible, like you can actually open yourself up for that kind of manipulation.
For sure, it's abusive. Like I'm thinking through like the MMEA, which is the multidimensional, like it's the measure that it's the most common measure used to measure emotional abuse. And one of the questions on there is like, I think, is it on there, or is it another one? But it's like does your partner like blame his problems on you? And so he was blaming his anxiety on you, but you're not responsible for his anxiety. You're not responsible for his mental health problems. He was.
Mm-hmm.
He was responsible for getting therapy and stuff,
But what happens when he says that, oh, you're not accommodating them? When, like, he uses that language.
Yeah, I mean, anytime, like people are allowed to have friends, any friends that they want. Their partner, it's always controlling whenever a partner tries to dictate, like, well, you shouldn't have that friend. I don't like that friend, therefore you should not be friends with them, or like you should think of me and not be friends with them, or something like that. Anytime a partner is trying to get in between like your friendships with other people, that's like controlling. Like they don't have to like your friends, like that's fine, but like whenever they try and like stop you from like seeing friends, or like trying to stop you from like just going out dancing or whatever you said, right? Yeah, like that's controlling too, because like you're allowed to you can do that. Yeah, and that's like, that was him like also putting like, that was him blaming you for his insecurities as well, because he was clearly insecure.
Yeah.
Right. That's a pretty big yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That was two very long months of my life. And the whole time he was cheating on me too. So
don't you love that?
yeah.
I swear to God, this is what I always hear. Like, it's like that was, so he was projecting onto you the whole time then.
Yeah, that's exactly what was going on.
Yeah.
He was like, oh, I guess if I'm doing this, she must be.
Yep. Yeah.
So we covered borderline. Let's get into ASPD, right?
Yeah.
So what are the biggest misconceptions about ASPD?
Maybe like that. I think like the biggest misconceptions are that like people with ASPD are likely to like kill someone or something, or like be a murderer or something, and it's like, no, that's still just a minority. Like Ted Bundy was diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder, amongst other things. But like, you know, most people with ASPD are not gonna kill someone or murder someone.
And for people who are confused in the chat, ASPD is what most people would think of as a sociopath, right? Like you lack empathy.
Yeah. When people use the term sociopath, that refers to someone with antisocial personality disorder. It's not psychopathy. It's different.
A little different, yeah.
But yeah, like, so
do you think that it is discriminatory to avoid being friends with someone that has ASPD?
Man, this is like tough, because at the same time, like, it's kind of like it's kind of understandable, because it can be like, even though they're not likely to kill someone, like it can still, they often still do a lot of dangerous things, and they can still put loved ones in danger, because they're kind of usually, you know, like I said, they're very self-focused on getting their own needs met, and generally they get their own needs met by manipulating people.
Is also like, is it a scale with ASPD? Like, does having ASPD just mean you lack complete empathy, or is there just like a scale of like low empathy to 0?
Yeah, it's more of a scale. They pretty much like turn off their empathy most of the time. Like, it's kind of like, it's like default, almost think of it like it's in the off position, like default. Also, we should go over that there's different types of empathy. So there's cognitive empathy and affective empathy.
What? I did not know this. Tell me all about it.
Yeah, and this is kind of important. Because, okay, so do you know how people with autism spectrum disorder tend to lack in cognitive empathy, but not affective empathy? So cognitive empathy is the empathy that's like, it's like the it's like, it's also referred to as mentalization, being able to understand another person's perspective, sort of. Not always, because, you know, people can't be expected to be mind readers, but like, like um being able to just sort of understand that, like, oh, if I do this to this person, that'll probably make them upset, that'll probably make them angry. So that's cognitive empathy. It's very much more like knowledge based. Sometimes it's
Okay.
called like the cold empathy. Affective empathy is feeling what another person is feeling. It's literally like feeling for another person. Affective empathy is like when you see someone crying and you're like,
And you
oh
just start
no.
crying yourself.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
affective
I
empathy.
feel like I
Yeah.
have both of those. Though
Yeah.
I do
And
notice that my empathy can really shut down when I'm feeling like
yeah,
attacked or something. Like
that's
especially
normal.
when someone yells at me, my
Yeah.
empathy just immediately boom disappears, and I think I just go into survival mode and like disassociate a bit.
That
Yeah.
can be normal. A lot of people, yeah, like when people are in like a like are when people are fighting and they're like really angry at each other, natural like our brain naturally like shuts down the empathy because
Mhm.
like your anger is elevated and the empathy sort of shuts down more. So like that's yeah, that's kind of normal, and that's why people say things like mean things sometimes in anger that they don't actually mean, and then
Yeah.
like afterwards, of course, like once they've kind of calmed down after like I don't know 15 minutes or something, they're like, oh no, I feel bad. That's normal. That doesn't happen with someone with ASPD. They don't have that moment where it's like, oh no, I feel bad now. They
Yeah.
don't
They
have
don't
that. They don't.
so they don't feel guilt.
No, rarely. Very, very rarely. Yeah, so like the normal healthy person will, yeah, come down from that anger, be like, oh, I feel
That
bad for
sounds
saying what I
lovely.
said.
I'm so jealous. Like, is that fucked up to say? Like, I'm really jealous because I feel like I feel guilty
Yeah,
every second of the day.
me too.
It's an all-consuming emotion. Like, I feel guilty
Yeah,
when
me
I
too.
feel successful. I feel guilty when I'm failing.
Me
Like
too.
all the time. Yeah.
I
So
feel guilty. I feel guilty every fucking time someone donates to me. I get this like wave of guilt over me that's like, oh God. Seriously, it's so bad.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. No.
Really
Whenever I
doesn't
started
come to.
having more than like 10 viewers, I'd be like, I feel so guilty. Like, there's so many great streamers out there. Why are people watching me? Like, um,
You're so
the
right.
yeah. So that's I guess a separate a separate problem. So it sounds lovely to live your life. Is it
Yeah,
so? If you do have ASPD, does that create like these benefits in situations? Like, are they more likely to be successful in certain areas because of that?
they are. Yeah, I mean, like research has shown that CEOs, a lot of CEOs score very high on like narcissism and sociopathy levels. Like it's very high because yeah, they're
Mm.
able to sort of like backstab to be in order to get to a successful place, and then they don't really feel much guilt. So it's like, I'm fine. Kind of. So yeah, they could just kind of do it and live with themselves just fine and sleep at night just fine.
Yeah,
Um
I read this book about the Machiavellianism of Tony
yeah.
Blair. Do you know Tony Blair? He was prime minister of
Oh,
Britain in the 90s, right? He was the guy who
yeah,
said the People's Princess speech. He was like a big labor guy. Um,
yeah,
and I mean his whole brand was being really nice, but
yeah,
in terms of the way he treated politics, like behind closed doors, like he was ruthless
yeah,
with his
yeah.
enemies and all this stuff and everything. And so like I don't know. So would you say that someone who can be that ruthless that they're likely to have ASPD, or is that like super irresponsible to say?
So basically Machiavellianism is technically a subclinical personality, meaning, okay, so subclinical means that it's not a disorder, it's not pathological, it's not abnormal. It's technically still within the normal range. It's not something you can diagnose. So it's
Okay.
something that anybody could just point out. Anybody could just like
Yeah,
be like,
because
hey,
someone could
that
be
sounds Machiavellian.
Machiavellian for like somewhat empathetic reasons in their head, right? Like I know like Hillary Clinton convinced herself to be Machiavellian because she like wanted to get
Mm,
control, because she wanted to do all these things that she thought were really important for children and
yeah.
in the United States and stuff.
Yeah, Machiavellianism is interesting because like there's a lot of overlap with Machiavellianism and psychopathy. Like Machiavellian Machiavellianism tends to be characterized by the shallow affect, so like the lack of emotionality and stuff, the lack of affective empathy. Also, by the way, that's the primary form of empathy that's lacking with narcissism and ASPD, is the affective empathy, not cognitive empathy. They don't actually lack in that too much at all. They very much tend to understand that, like, if they do something, it's going to hurt someone. They just
So in that way, they're still very responsible for their behavior, right? Because they know that what they're doing can hurt someone.
Yeah, they use defense mechanisms to justify their behavior and not feel like I'm a bad person, because they don't want to be bad people. That's the thing. They don't want to be bad people, and they actually, like, they'll generally get very, very offended if you insinuate that they're like a bad person, because they use very, very elaborate cognitive distortions and defense mechanisms to avoid confronting that reality. There's a lot of like denial. Honestly, the cluster
Yeah, I
B
mean, who can
personality
blame them,
disorders
though?
are like all about denial about everything.
Well, okay. Well, that brings me to one of my big questions about this. Like, what people tend to group the personality disorders with mood disorders, right? So people often say, like, oh, like, people often think that bipolar is very similar to borderline, but they're like in totally different categories, right?
Yeah, no, they're not related at all.
Yeah, there
The
can be
only
overlap,
thing
but
that sometimes, like there's similar, like there's overlapping symptoms, like the impulsive sex and like promiscuity is like overlapping, because like with people with bipolar, like sometimes during a manic episode they'll have like impulsive like sex with people because they're manic. That's bipolar type 1, of course. But and sometimes like clinicians will misdiagnose the two, borderline or bipolar. Yeah,
especially with bipolar, that it can go on for like a few months when they're in that manic period, right?
Yeah, that's or they can have it be what's it called, the rapid cycling. So like the manic episode lasts for like 2 days and then it's back down to depression or something. Yeah.
So would you say that it's actually really like unfair to group mood disorders with personality disorders, because mood disorders are so much like, I've heard it be described as like a mood disorder is like
They're
the weather.
Different.
Yeah,
They're
whereas a personality disorder is the personality. It's like it's like the climate.
Yeah, basically, yeah. I mean, again, people can still change their behavior and stuff, and so that they don't behave in those like maladaptive ways and stuff. But yeah, it still is like kind of a part of the person's personality, and it's like a lifelong struggle. Whereas like the mood disorder, that's not the way it is. That's how it is. Like that's the difference between personality disorders and like mental illnesses. They're very different. Personality disorders are very distinct from everything else, kind of, because again, it's the person's personality, and that's why it's so difficult to treat it.
Is that also like why? Oh, sorry.
Oh, it's okay. I was just gonna say another thing with personality disorders is that because they're egocentric, they literally think that they're normal. They think everyone else is like fucking crazy. Like they're normal. And they like think that everyone else should be like them. And
so if you think you're crazy, does that mean that you actually don't have a personality disorder? If you do think you're crazy, that means you don't have a personality disorder?
Kind of.
Or less likely?
Less likely, I guess. Because, like, sometimes people with personality disorders will have, like, a moment of, like, breakthrough. They'll have these, like, moments. Because I've seen it with people. And, like, they'll have this moment where it's, like, maybe I am the one. Maybe it's me. but it doesn't last long because it's so painful for them it's so painful. So like it only lasts for like a little bit, and then they go right back into the denial mode and being like, nope, it's everyone else. Nope, it's all those other people. It's definitely all those people.
Well, I know for me that I remember when I read I was just told that it was like I had anxiety, and then when I read about the symptoms of OCD, and like rather than just the stereotype of what OCD was, I actually read the symptoms. I was like, oh my god, every single one of these is me to a T. Like like I was just like check, and it wasn't a shitty moment for me. It was a nice moment. It wasn't like I didn't feel, even though there's like such a stereotype with people with OCD, I didn't care about that in that moment. I was just like, oh my god, finally I know what's wrong, right? Because I've known something is wrong, and knowing that something was wrong, it was such a good feeling, because I'm like, now I feel like I can work on it and fix it.
That's not, and that's not the thing.
So people with personality disorders, they don't feel like that.
No, they don't experience that, like, kind of, because usually people with mental illnesses, that's how they feel. They're like, oh my god, there's a name for it, so I'm not just crazy. Oh my god, it's just this, it's just this disorder, it's just that disorder. Not for people with personality disorders.
Is that because of the fear of judgment?
Don't want to hear anything is wrong with them.
So is that because of the fear of judgment that we talked about before?
What?
Is that because of the fear of judgment that we talked about before?
It is. Yeah, it's the judgment thing. The denial is so intense for them that it's like, like even just implying that like they might have, I don't know, something like maybe some anxiety or something will often produce a very highly defensive reaction. And it's always something that kind of puzzles me, because I'm like, but you can find relief through this. You can find relief through like knowing that like, hey, it's not you, it's just this disorder, and you can like
like sometimes
work on this disorder,
something freeing about it.
And
like especially just freeing about knowing that like these issues are not, necessarily just completely due to personal responsibility. Like there is something that can explain it, and there's a path to fixing it. And on top of that, the biggest thing for me is just like knowing that you're not alone and feeling like that.
Sure. Definitely. Yeah.
Do people with like BPD, like can they benefit from interacting with other people with BPD? Like, and being like a community for that, or is that like a recipe for disaster?
So here's the thing. So it's very much like with these personalities, it's very much birds of a feather flock together. And so like people with cluster B traits, not even necessarily full-blown personality disorders, but cluster B traits, they end up finding each other anyway, and they end up getting along really well because they all think similarly and they all feel similarly about things, and they all are like, yeah, that's judgmental. Yeah, that's judgmental as fuck. Like, we don't like that. Yeah, we don't like that. So like, it'd be like hive mind sort of. And
so it's almost bad because then you end up in like an echo chamber.
Yeah. And then like they can also end up being like, well, all my friends think this way, so clearly we're normal, and I don't know what's wrong with these people. So it can end up being like that too. They could end up having it be reaffirmed, almost like their distorted thinking reaffirmed. But then also it can be very helpful, and for treating borderline personality disorder, it's almost always group therapy, because it can also, it's also very helpful to find other people with BPD and have them as like a support system, and because
so it just needs to be
what you're feeling and going through what you're going through. So
so it just needs to be like they need to be with other people with BPD, but in the right setting, and with other people who are also on their path towards fixing it.
Yeah, who aren't also in extremely deep denial.
Doesn't that like, I feel like that's for everything. Like I remember even when I was addicted to an MMO, Elder Scrolls Online, I always described it, and people never believe me. I always described it as like a cocaine addiction, and or like heroin or something, like where once I started pulling back from it, like I felt like the people that were in that world were like always trying to like drag me down. Like they're like encouraging me to go back and play more, and everything like that. And so that environment can become like toxic because they're a part of, they're in the place that you're trying to get out of. And whereas I really love talking to people. Yeah, whereas I love talking to people who have like are still recovering from like their addictions to WoW or something, because like they totally understand. So it's a mixed bag, I guess.
Yeah, it's very similar. I mean, honestly, with almost anything, even like eating disorders, like there's like that can be extremely deadly when they find each other on like those sites and stuff, and then they incur like it's like
I know, and we start giving each other tips.
But then like, sometimes also it's really helpful because they can sort of be like help each other with like through recovery and stuff. So same with addiction. So it kind of is like, and like as a general rule, like when one person in the group, and this is just a thing that happens, it's a part of the way the group psychology sort of works, and also like, but particularly like a pathological, it's mainly with like a pathology, a group of people with like shared pathology and stuff. When one person starts to get better, the group starts to do things to try and sabotage. It's not intentional. This is all unconscious. It just happens, like because they're sensing the other person is being
they don't have malintent, right? That's just the world that they live in as well.
And like the person who's getting healthier is like expressing like some healthier attitudes and views and stuff, and the group is reacting very badly to that because it's like, oh, what, this is different. I don't this is kind of threatening to like our group here. I
totally have that instinct. I'm not gaming. Ever since I started streaming, I haven't been gaming as much. And I have no clue why. Like, I'm sure we could psychoanalyze that for like years. But something that I've noticed in general is like, is that there could be like friction between the people that used to play games with me all the time and all of that stuff. But I don't know, it's a tough issue. Someone had a question that they were asking specifically, is what you were talking about with group therapy, is that kind of like what people do with AA?
AA is technically like a group therapy, but it's usually not run by an actual like licensed therapist. It's usually run by like a life coach type of person, I guess.
Okay. Is that bad?
No. AA works for a lot of people, but it also doesn't work for a lot of people. So AA also is very much like religious focused.
Yeah,
so
that's what I heard.
Probably people who are atheists probably wouldn't really, I don't know, they might not like it too much, but it's just about like what works for the person, to be honest. AA gets a lot of like hate, I feel like, but I mean, honestly, if it works for some people, that's a good thing. And it also provides like a good support group for people. So
support groups are huge. Like when you're trying to, end a bad habit or, exit an unhealthy lifestyle, having a partner or just friends like to do that with who are on the same pathway as you is like, it's huge because human beings are such social creatures.
Isolation is pretty much the worst thing for humanity. It's really bad for our brain, basically.
I think
isolated people literally don't live as long.
Really?
People who are like married or like have a lot of friends.
Well, you know what I heard? This is gonna sound so misandrous, but I heard that men live longer when they're married to women, but women live shorter lives when they're married to men.
Yeah, that's actually true.
Okay, that's just really funny. I'm sorry, I should have laughed about death, but
I know, like, it's weird. Like, It's really weird, honestly.
So all the men should be getting married, basically.
They're also happier. Single like women report being happier than like married women, but single men report being, oh my god, like way worse than like
Isn't that so interesting? Because our society tells us the opposite, right? That like being tied down as a man is such a terrible thing, and being and being like a spinster as a woman is like the worst thing in the world.
You know, it turns out it's the opposite. Patriarchy was wrong.
Yeah. It's crazy. Okay. Well, honestly, like I feel like we could actually talk about psychology stuff for like 10 days straight.
I know. I just realized, holy crap, it's 5:20.
Yeah, no, somehow we were doing this for 3 hours.
Oh my god.
So yeah, so we should probably
again.
we totally should. This is great. Yeah. So yeah, we should probably end it. Sure. But is there anything that, like, first of all, thanks for coming on so much. Like, this is so cool.
For inviting me.
Yeah, like, and I mean, it's crazy. Like, I have so many, I shouldn't say crazy, sorry, but I have so many viewers right now, so I really appreciate it. That's super cool.
Oh, really? That's good.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So thank you for that. I'm just getting into streaming, so it's really cool to see that. But you're also a streamer, so do you want to like put in your stream and everything, and I can like link it in chat?
Oh yeah, sure. I'm I'm so bad at marketing myself. Oh my
no,
God.
It's okay. I usually write down like a little blurb.
So I stream at Anavoir. Do you want me to like?
One of my viewers just linked it for us.
This is stream. Oh yeah, there it is. Okay, thank you, Vocado. Hi. I'm sorry, I haven't been looking at chat at all because I was like scared to look at chat. Like, oh no, all these people, the people who call me crazy, they could be here.
Well, that's why I think it's just cool for people to see talking about something that we all find really interesting. Like, especially psychology is such a, I don't know, it's such a prevalent subject, and I don't know, I find it completely fascinating, and
I do too.
So you're a streamer, and
I stream.
What kind of stuff do you stream?
I stream, like, sometimes I stream my like borked like modded Skyrim streams, and sometimes I stream about psychology things too. It's kind of like I'm like a variety streamer mostly. So yeah,
cool.
You can follow me if you want.
Cool. Well,
and ask me psychology questions anytime. I don't mind. I like answering them.
Yeah. And also we should probably clarify that none of this is meant to be like individual diagnoses for anyone. You should, if you are concerned that you might have a personality disorder or anything about the subject, you should go to an actual licensed therapist, right?
Don't self-diagnose.
It's a bad idea. It'll get you in trouble, and as I have learned in my past, this was just supposed to be kind of like, informative and just having a casual discussion on it.
Yeah, definitely. There no diagnosing or anything like that. It's just like talking in general about these topics, pretty much just for educational purposes. Yeah, instead get your diagnosis from Wikipedia. I'm kidding. Don't actually do that. Okay. So yeah, and in that someone's gonna clip that and I'm fully canceled. Thanks so much for coming, Anna. It was super cool. It was great to hear about this. Really appreciate it. Yeah, I appreciate it too. We could definitely talk more, like a part 2 or something sometime if you'd want. Hell yeah. Okay. Well, see ya. Hey, bye.